There's something sacred about silence until it starts to whisper back. They say every confession has a beginning, but not all of them have an end. This one began with a voice too measured to be human, too perfect to be trusted, a voice that promised truth but built its truth on lies. Somewhere in the mountains of Oregon, an abandoned sanatorium waits beneath layers of dust and decay. Its halls are empty, but the walls remember. They hold voices, echoes, fragments of what was once spoken here. Some call them memories, others call them hauntings. One night, a group of thrill seekers went looking for proof, but what they found wasn't a ghost. It was a recording, a confession, the voice of a man who claimed to cure madness by creating it. His name was Dr. Reed, and the tape they found should never have been played, but we did. And now, the voice is awake again. The Vengeful Gear, an abandoned meat processing factory on the outskirts of Chicago. The air smells of rust and cold oil. Once, hundreds of workers sweated under flickering fluorescent lights until one night, a malfunction took 3 lives. The company blamed human error. The town forgot. The factory still hums at night. My name's Caleb Morgan, 23 years old, film student, and apparently the only idiot willing to guard a meat processing plant that hasn't seen a living worker since 1984. The building sits at the far end of Riverton Industrial Park, outside Chicago. Every other factory here has been demolished, sold for scrap, or turned into storage units. But this one, the Merritt and Sons Meat Co., it's still here. Cracked windows, warped steel doors, and a faint smell of oil that clings to the cold air like memory. They told me I just have to check the perimeter every couple of hours, make sure no vandals sneak in, and log the rounds. Simple. Easy money for a broke student. But there's a reason the locals call this place the hangar. When the wind slides through the old vents, it moans. Low, wet, like something breathing through a mask. It was my first night on shift. 11:47 p.m. I parked near the loading bay. The asphalt glittered under the sodium lights, patches of ice reflecting pale orange. My boots echoed as I stepped out, and the sound bounced around the empty lot. Every step came back with a half-second delay, like the place didn't want to let go of sound. The manager, some guy named Mr. Hale, handed me a ring of keys earlier that afternoon. Stay in the security office, do your rounds at midnight, 2 and 4. Don't go near the second floor. It's unstable. He said it like he'd rehearsed the warning. I asked if the cameras worked. He said no, power's been cut for years. But the red light above the monitor was on when I got there, flickering. The air inside the factory was stale and metallic, like old blood rubbed into iron. The first hallway was lined with hanging hooks, empty rails stretching into shadow. My flashlight beam caught on them one after another, until it found something odd. One of the hooks, bigger, heavier than the rest, was bent upward. Its tip was dark, as though burned, not rusted. The chain it hung from was twisted, like something had turned it counterclockwise 100 times. I checked the maintenance log. That area hadn't been entered in months. When I brushed a finger against the hook, the metal was warm, not room temperature. Warm. I jerked back, shining my light across the floor. Nothing but dust. A few footprints mine, and an old wrench half buried in grime. I forced myself to laugh. Static from the old radio in the guard room crackled through the hallway, faint but constant. At midnight sharp, I started my first patrol. The pipes groaned overhead, dripping condensation in uneven intervals. I told myself it was the building cooling down, that the noises were just air pockets and loose metal, but every sound seemed to respond. When I slowed down, the creaks stopped. When I started walking again, they followed. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I aimed it down the processing corridor. That's when I saw it, a streak of fresh rust, running down the wall like a dried tear. I leaned closer. The pattern was oddly symmetrical. 2 long drips curving together like an outline of a human form. My chest tightened. I rubbed the mark with my sleeve, nothing came off. And then I heard it. A click, then a low, rhythmic hum. Somewhere upstairs, a machine had turned on. The power shouldn't be working. I knew that. But the hum grew louder, blending with something else. A faint metallic clank, spaced like a heartbeat. I found the stairwell door unlocked. hesitated. Hale had said the second floor was unstable, but the noise was impossible to ignore. It wasn't curiosity that made me climb those steps, it was the way the humming called, like a low voice beneath the sound, whispering my name through the concrete. Caleb. My flashlight flickered as I reached the landing. Everything smelled like oil and burnt hair. Rows of rusted machinery stood in silence, except one. A conveyor line half collapsed, dust thick as ash was moving. The chain rattled, pulling hooks through the air in slow, uneven jerks. And hanging from one of those hooks was the same one I'd touched downstairs. The tip glowed faintly orange, like metal heated from inside. I called out, "Who's there?" The machine answered with a shriek, a high-pitched screech of gears grinding dry. The hook jerked violently, swinging side to side, throwing off sparks that hissed into the dark. I stumbled backward, my boot slipping on the oily floor. When my hand shot out to catch myself, it landed on something wet. I looked down. My palm was streaked with a dark, oily liquid that smelled like blood and iron, and the machine stopped. Instantly. No sound. No movement. Just my breathing and the faint static from my radio. Then the hook moved again, slowly, turning toward me as if it were watching. I don't remember dropping the flashlight, but the next thing I knew, the light rolled across the floor and caught the reflection of a face. No, not a face. A mask of metal bent into the suggestion of one. The air grew heavier. I backed away, whispering to myself, "It's just a draft. It's just settling." But then the chain lifted, upward, smooth, controlled. There was no one there. I ran, down the stairs, through the corridor, into the security office. Slammed the door, locked it. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. The monitors flickered to life. Static. Then one camera, the one pointed at the processing line, snapped into focus. The machine was moving again, but there was someone on it. A figure dangling upside down, hooked through the back of a blue uniform. It twitched, limp, like a puppet caught mid-dance. The image wavered, glitched, and when it cleared, the figure was gone. Only the hook remained, swaying. 1:12 a.m. I turned off the monitor, but the humming didn't stop. It was in the walls, in the pipes. The air vents began to tremble softly, like a sigh running through the whole building. Then, from somewhere far off deep in the production hall came a sound I will never forget. A single, muffled scream. Not loud, not sharp, just resigned, like someone yelling through a mouth full of cloth. I froze. Every part of me screamed to get out, but my legs refused to move. My mind tried to rationalize at old recordings, maybe an animal trapped in the ducts, but no lie could fit the sound of pleading. It came again. Shorter this time, and this time, it ended in a wet cough. I whispered, "There's no one here. There's no one here." Then something knocked 3 slow, heavy bangs on the door behind me. I turned. Nothing. When I looked back at the monitor, there was a new feed open, one I hadn't selected. Camera 4B, the storage locker room. On the screen, I saw myself, sitting in the security chair, staring at the monitors, except I wasn't moving. I wasn't blinking. The figure on the screen raised its hand slowly and pointed behind the camera. The feed cut out. That was enough. I grabbed my bag, keys, and ran for the exit. But when I reached the main door, the heavy steel one, with the chain lock, the padlock was gone. The door itself was welded shut. I didn't even hear them come in to fix it. The air pressed in around me, thick with heat. I could almost feel the heartbeat of the place slow, deliberate, through the soles of my boots. Something whispered in the duct above me. A scrape of metal, then a drip. Rust-colored liquid landed on my wrist, stinging like acid. I looked up. The hook was there, hanging from the ceiling vent. It swayed once, twice, then went still. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. Didn't tell anyone. But when I unzipped my backpack to grab my camera equipment, the smell hit first. Sharp, metallic. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped neatly in a folded piece of stained cloth, was the hook. And on the inside of the cloth, written in fading marker, shift ends when the gear stops. But the gear never stopped. Not since 1984. Metal remembers everything that touches it, especially the ones who died holding on. I didn't go back the next night. I told the site manager I was sick, food poisoning, flu, anything. He just sighed over the phone and said, "You film kids are all the same. Too many horror movies." He didn't ask why my voice was shaking. The hook sat on my desk, wrapped in that dirty cloth. I tried throwing it away, twice. First time, the trash collector never came. Second time, it was back in my apartment before I could even process it. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't nerves. It was just there. I kept telling myself I'd hallucinated everything in that factory, the voices, the figure, the camera feed showing me, but the burn on my wrist from the rust was real. It throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. By the third night, I was back at Merritt and Sons, not because I wanted to be, because I couldn't stand being anywhere else. The city felt too quiet, the apartment too empty. And every time I closed my eyes, I heard it a faint clank, 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 echoing from somewhere just beyond sleep. When I arrived, the air was heavier than before. The clouds were low, swollen with rain. The parking lot lights flickered like dying candles. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it, except the radio. It was on. A voice hissed through the static. The screams were said to echo through the pipes for 3 nights after the accident. I froze. The signal was faint, like it came from a faraway AM station. The kind that only exists between frequencies, where dead channels hum like insects. The voice continued. Workers claimed the gear teeth turned even after the power failed, even after the blood dried. Then the broadcast cut off. I stood in the silence, staring at the speaker, waiting for the punchline of prank, maybe, but the radio dial hadn't moved. The locker room felt colder. My breath fogged. I decided to check the power box, maybe a residual current. Maybe not everything was shut down after all. That's when I saw it. The chain. It was lying across the floor, stretched taut from the doorway to the far wall, as if someone had dragged it through thick oil. Each link was coated in dark rust except one section polished clean, glinting under my flashlight. I stepped over it carefully. The air hummed again. Somewhere behind me, something clicked. I turned. Nothing there. But on the wall, someone had written in chalk. You heard it too. The writing was old, faded. It looked like it had been scrawled with a trembling hand. I made my way toward the upper level again. I shouldn't have, but there's something magnetic about fear once it finds you, it wants company. The machinery floor looked different now. No dust. No debris. Everything was clean. The same conveyor belt that had moved on its own last night was gleaming. The metal rails were smooth, almost oiled. I ran a hand along one, and a faint vibration passed through my fingertips like the purr of an animal. Then a sound, erupted metallic, distorted, and human, all at once. A scream, not a recording, not a memory. It came from inside one of the machines. I stumbled backward as a cloud of cold air blasted from a broken pipe. It carried the smell of grease and something sweeter like burnt sugar. The scream turned to gurgling, then stopped. My flashlight flickered, and for a second, I saw faces in the steel, warped outlines of eyes, mouths open mid-shout, vanishing when I blinked. I pulled out my phone, switched to video, and started recording. If I could capture this, I could prove it wasn't in my head. The audio glitched instantly. High-pitched whine, static. Then beneath it all words, barely perceptible. Low, mechanical, shift, end, when, gear, stop. I froze. The exact phrase from the cloth. The hook in my bag began to rattle. I didn't want to touch it. But the sound wouldn't stop. The metal scraping against the zipper, harder, faster, like it was trying to escape. I dumped the bag out. The hook hit the concrete with a sharp clang. For a moment, it stayed still. Then it twitched. A slow, deliberate sway from side to side. I could feel static crawling up my legs, as though the ground itself was charged. The overhead lights flickered on for the first time in decades, buzzing with power. And then the machinery moved. Gears spun, conveyor belts rolled, saws turned, and the entire factory came alive with deafening metallic rhythm. It was like being inside a heart made of steel. I screamed for it to stop, but my voice was swallowed by the noise. Every machine was running, yet the power cables were still cut. I saw movement at the far end of the hall, a figure, half hidden behind steam, dressed in a torn work uniform, face obscured. He was standing perfectly still, head tilted toward me. "Hey," I shouted. "You're not supposed to be here." The man didn't move. Then, slowly, he lifted his arm. He wasn't pointing. He was missing his hand. Where it should have been, there was a jagged stump of metal, gears fused into bone. He opened his mouth, and the scream came again. Only this time, it wasn't from the machines. It came from him. I ran. I don't remember choosing a direction, just the sensation of sprinting through narrow corridors, each one identical, each one echoing with that awful mechanical scream. The air was so thick I could taste the rust. I burst into the refrigeration hall, my flashlight beam cutting through clouds of fog. The hooks above me swung slightly, each one dripping condensation or something worse. When I looked up, my stomach twisted. Names were carved into the beams. Dozens of them. All faded but legible. Each name ended with the same date. Aug 9, 1984. And at the very end of the list, carved fresh, bright silver against old iron, was Caleb Morgan. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath came out in long, shuddering plumes. The hook in my hand began to heat up again, burning my skin, forcing me to drop it. When it hit the ground, the sound was different this time. Not a clang. A voice. A single syllable. Rasped through static. Why? The echo rolled through the corridor, bouncing off the steel walls, distorting until it no longer sounded like a question but a plea. Why? 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 Each repetition came closer, until it sounded like it was inside my head. I pressed my palms to my ears, shouting, "Stop!" The voices stopped, but the silence afterward was worse. I looked down. The hook wasn't on the floor anymore. It was hanging, suspended by an invisible chain, slowly twisting in midair. I stepped back, heart hammering. My body felt electrified, like static, wrapped around every nerve. Then the hook jerked forward fast, stopping inches from my face. And I saw it. Reflected in the polished metal was not me, but the man from the steam, the one with the gear-fused arm. His mouth opened in perfect sync with mine, but the voice that came out wasn't human. We didn't fall, we were dropped. The hook slammed into the ground, the chain snapping down like a whip. Sparks exploded. When my vision cleared, the figure was gone. Only the smell of ozone and burnt oil lingered. I stumbled back into the office, gasping, drenched in sweat. My hands were trembling too hard to hold the keys. I slammed the door and slid down against it. The monitors blinked on again. Every screen showed the same thing. The factory floor, alive and working. Men and women in blue uniforms walked the line, their motions mechanical, repetitive, endless. Steam poured from vents that hadn't functioned in decades, and on every conveyor belt hung bodies, not flesh and bone, but metal, shaped like people, twitching in slow rhythm, eyes glowing faintly orange. In the corner of the screen, one of them turned its head toward the camera. I couldn't breathe. It raised an arm, and the sound returned, that horrible, distorted scream that seemed to come from every pipe, every wall, every gear tooth. I yanked the power cord from the wall. The screen stayed on. The machines on the monitor began to accelerate, faster and faster, until the entire image blurred into a storm of motion. And through that blur, I saw one word flash across every screen, burned into the static. Remember. Something snapped in me then. I grabbed my coat and ran. The doors were open this time, the lock's gone. Rain lashed the lot outside, cold and heavy, washing the oil and grime from my hands as I stumbled toward my car. When I looked back, the factory lights were on, every window glowing a dull red, like the whole building was a furnace. I drove until sunrise. Didn't look back again. But the sound followed me, even now, sitting in my apartment, the city quiet and alive with morning. I can still hear it, faint, somewhere deep in the plumbing. Maybe the old radiator, a soft metallic whir. Every now and then, it slows, pauses, then starts again. And sometimes when it does, I swear I can hear the faintest echo inside it, a voice trying to speak through the machinery. Shift. Not done. Caleb Morgan thought he left the factory behind, but the factory never left him. Caleb hadn't slept. Not really. He closed his eyes, but his body stayed half awake, suspended somewhere between a heartbeat and a tremor. Every time he drifted off, he could still hear the groan of metal from the factory. It didn't sound like memory. It sounded present, persistent, alive. When morning came, he tried to convince himself that it had been a dream, some elaborate echo stitched together by exhaustion. He told himself that the brain, deprived of rest, can make ghosts out of pipes and monsters out of sound. But when he looked down at his hands, the lie dissolved. There was still a faint red shimmer beneath his fingernails, like he had dipped them into something thick and dark hours ago. He rubbed at it until the skin turned raw, but it wouldn't come off. It wasn't quite blood. It wasn't quite oil. It was both. He didn't tell anyone. The last time he had mentioned the noises, his manager had laughed. Old pipes, the man said. That building's been making death rattles since Nixon. Caleb nodded, pretending to agree, pretending not to see the way the man's eyes flicked away when he said it too quickly, too deliberately. That night, he went back. The factory was colder than before, the kind of cold that doesn't sting but soaks. He felt it in his jaw, in the soft parts of his throat, in his teeth. His flashlight cut through the dark like a tired eye, jittery, uncertain. Every step echoed, like someone else was matching his pace half a second behind. The air smelled of old grease and damp brick. He could hear water dripping from somewhere up above, rhythmic, metronomic, almost intentional. It reminded him of the sound editing suites at film school, when they used slow, isolated drips to mimic the beat of a human pulse. He swallowed hard. The corridor leading to the mechanical floor was darker than usual. He noticed new stains on the concrete, dark, oily trails that hadn't been there the night before. They weaved toward the maintenance stairs, curling like veins beneath the skin of rust. Caleb hesitated. Then he followed them. The stairwell was a throat of iron and shadow. Every step moaned beneath his weight. Halfway up, his flashlight dimmed, then flickered out completely. He smacked it once, twice, and for a split second, light returned just long enough to show him something on the wall. A handprint, deep, sunken, and glistening, pressed in oil. He stepped closer. The print was larger than his, the fingers too long, the outline uneven, as if the hand had been trembling or melting when it was made. And then, just below it, written in that same dark smear, he saw something else. A single word. Remember. The light died again. He froze. Somewhere above him, the machine started to hum, softly, mechanically, like a beast stirring in its sleep. He reached the top of the stairs and entered the production hall. The machine stood in silence, the same rusted carcasses he'd seen 100 times. Hooks, belts, grinders, all inert, but the air vibrated with a pulse, like something enormous breathing just beneath the floor. A faint light pulsed from one of the conveyor lines, a control panel ancient, dented, but on. Caleb approached it, the floor groaning beneath each step. On the main switchboard, one lever had been pulled down. The label read, Feed Line 3. He didn't touch it. He couldn't. His hand hovered, trembling. The switch was warm. Too warm. Then, Slowly, the belts began to move. They lurched once, twice, then settled into motion, a low, mechanical rhythm echoing through the chamber. The sound wasn't just mechanical, it was wet. Each rotation came with a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled through viscous fluid. Caleb backed away. He should have run, but there, at the far end of the line, under the flickering ceiling light, he saw the hook, the same cursed hook that he'd thrown away 2 nights ago. It hung from the ceiling, swaying gently, and beneath it, a dark puddle growing wider. He squinted. The light above the hook flickered, and for a heartbeat, he saw it clearly. A pair of boots, standing in the puddle. No legs, just boots, filled with something heavy, sinking slowly into the black. The smell hit him next, metallic, burnt, and sweet, like heated oil mixed with blood. He stumbled backward, gagging, his hand catching on a rusted railing. It sliced his palm open. The instant his blood touched the floor, the entire factory shuddered. The belt stopped. The humming ceased. For a moment, there was only silence, thick, suffocating. Then, from the far end of the hall, came a voice. It wasn't human. It was a sound made of grinding metal and strained air, forcing itself into syllables. Feedline never stops. Caleb's breath hitched. He turned toward the noise, his flashlight trembling in his grip. Something was moving through the machines. He couldn't see it, but he could hear it, a dragging, metallic rhythm scraping across the walls. He started to back away, his boots slipping on the oily floor. His injured hand throbbed, the cut burning as if something inside it was alive. When he looked down, he saw the oil on the floor begin to shimmer, mixing with his blood, swirling into patterns. Not random, intentional. They formed the shape of gears, interlocking, turning. And then, like a whisper beneath his skin, he felt it, the rhythm, the pulse, the heartbeat of the factory, syncing with his own. He couldn't tell where the sound ended, and he tried to run. He didn't make it far. Halfway through the hall, his flashlight flickered again, and in that strobe of dim light, he saw flashes of movement. Figures, dozens of them, all in torn uniforms, faces obscured by soot, their bodies half metal, half flesh. They stood behind the machines, watching, silent, waiting. One stepped forward, the outline of his face barely human. His jaw was a twisted mess of rusted bolts and steel. He raised his hand, the same deformed one from the stairwell wall. Oil dripped from his fingers. It hit the floor and hissed. "You turned it on," the voice rasped. "Now, it remembers." Caleb stumbled backward, shaking his head. "I didn't," but his voice broke, because deep down, he knew he had. The hum grew louder. The gears started spinning again, not from electricity, but from momentum. The machines came alive, dragging unseen weight across the belts. And above it all, the hook began to swing faster, wider, until it slammed into the ceiling beam, sending a rain of rust and dust down upon him. The shadows moved closer. He turned and ran, slipping in the dark, the taste of metal thick in his throat. He reached the door, pulled at it, locked. He pulled harder, screaming, but the handle wouldn't move. It was slick with oil, the same black-red mixture that now coated his hands. He could hear footsteps behind him. Slow, dragging, mechanical. A hand landed on his shoulder. Cold, heavy, wet. He froze. When Caleb opened his eyes again, the factory was silent. The machines were still. He was lying on the floor, the air thick and unmoving. His flashlight had rolled away, its beam cutting a single white line across the room, landing right on the hook. It no longer swayed, but something dangled from it. A piece of fabric, a torn name tag. The edges were soaked black. He crawled closer, his breath shallow, his body trembling. The name on the tag was smeared, but one word was still legible. Morgan. His throat tightened. He stumbled back, heart hammering. The room seemed to tilt, as if the walls themselves were leaning toward him, listening. In the oil puddle, his reflection stared back, but the eyes weren't his. They were metallic, still, and from somewhere deep within the walls, the voice whispered again, quieter this time, almost intimate. "We built the line with our hands. Now it runs on yours." Morning light had no warmth. It just existed, a pale, washed-out hue seeping through the blinds of Caleb's apartment. Dust floated in it like tiny ghosts, suspended and unmoving. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands trembling in his lap. The cut on his palm was gone. Not healed gone. The skin was smooth, waxy, unnaturally pale, as though the blood had been drawn out of it. He turned it over again and again. No scab, no mark. Only that strange smell, faint metallic, like machine oil. He hadn't called in sick. He hadn't quit. He'd gone to bed still in his uniform, and when he woke, the clock read 6:45 p.m. His shift started at 7, and somehow, he was already wearing his boots. The drive to the factory blurred into a string of empty moments. Traffic lights blinked from red to green, but he couldn't recall stopping. The world outside the windshield seemed drained of detail houses, street lamps, silhouettes of people, walking dogs, all faded, like he was moving through someone else's memory. When he pulled into the lot, the sky had turned an unnatural gray. The clouds hung low, pressing against the roofs of the old industrial blocks. The factory gates were open. They hadn't been in years. He stepped out of the car. The air was thicker here, heavy with the scent of rust, wet brick, and something sweet that didn't belong. He recognized it immediately. Oil. Caleb told himself he wouldn't go inside. He told himself he'd drive home, report the breach, let someone else deal with it, but his feet moved. Before he made the decision, one step, then another, and when he blinked, he was standing inside the main hall. The factory had changed. It wasn't decayed anymore. The walls were still rusted. Yes, but the machines gleamed, slick with dark sheen. The floors were polished steel, not cracked concrete. Light pulsed from the ceiling in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Everything was alive. He could hear the conveyor belts humming in perfect synchronization, the gears turning with low metallic murmurs, like whispers reciting something over and over again. The air was warm, too humid, almost breathing. He stood there for what felt like minutes, maybe hours, watching the machinery work by itself. No workers, no power source, just motion, endless, precise, ritualistic. Then, from somewhere deep in the system, came the first scream. It wasn't sharp or sudden. It was drawn out, guttural, fading into the rhythm of the gears like another instrument in a mechanical choir. Caleb flinched backward. The sound came again, another voice, then another, until the entire factory was singing in agony. And over it all, he heard the words, "Feed line never stops." He stumbled toward the control room. The door was open this time, and inside, the monitors flickered with static. He reached for one of them, wiping the screen with his sleeve. For a moment, the image cleared. A camera feed. The maintenance hall. And there, suspended from the ceiling, was the hook. The same hook. Only now, it wasn't empty. A body hung from it. Head down. Its skin was pale, slick, glistening with oil. Caleb stepped closer, the air leaving his lungs. He leaned toward the screen, squinting, and froze. The face was his own. The monitor crackled, then went black. He stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The entire room seemed to tilt. On the wall, the red emergency light blinked in a slow, patient rhythm. Each pulse illuminated the control panels and the stains on the floor beneath them. Dark stains. Oily. He crouched down, touched one, with trembling fingers. Warm. When he lifted his hand, the black liquid followed, clinging, stretching, refusing to let go. It slithered up his wrist like a living thing, seeping into his skin. He screamed, shaking it off, but the more he fought, the deeper it sank. His veins darkened, branching like cracks beneath glass. His heartbeat slowed, not weak, but mechanical, measured. And then the whisper came again. "The last shift never ends." He looked up. In the corner of the room stood a figure, human in shape, but its body was a patchwork of steel and bone, its face half hidden by a welder's mask welded shut. Its chest cavity glowed faintly, gears turning inside where lungs should be. It raised a trembling hand. "You were chosen," it said, its voice like air forced through rusted pipes. Someone must keep the line moving. Caleb backed away, shaking his head. No, I'm done. I quit." But the figure tilted its head, the metal groaning. "You can't quit what you already are." It stepped closer. The sound of its footsteps echoed like hammer strikes, each one slower than the last. "We built it with our hands," the figure continued, voice cracking through the air. "It took us. It broke us. It remembered us. Now, it remembers you." The lights flickered, and in that strobe, he saw what surrounded him, dozens of shapes, stepping out of the shadows, workers, or what was left of them, faces half consumed by rust, eyes hollow, jaws creaking with oil. Each one wore the same uniform. Each one had the same name stitched on the chest. Morgan. They moved toward him in silence. Not to attack, to join. He turned and ran, pushing through the control room door, sprinting into the hall. The air thickened around him, vibrating with the rhythm of the machines. The belts turned faster, the hooks swaying violently above him. He could hear his heartbeat sinking again with the motion, thump, grind, until he couldn't tell which was which. He slipped, hit the ground hard. The oil beneath him rippled outward, alive, reflecting the red ceiling lights and liquid pulses. He tried to stand, but his limbs felt heavy like the floor was pulling him down. The oil was climbing again, crawling up his sleeves, his neck. It seeped into his mouth, cold and metallic. His vision blurred. Then, through the blur, he saw them. The workers stood around him, forming a circle. No faces, only shapes. Their movements were slow, deliberate, synchronized as if they were still following orders. And in the center, above them, the hook lowered from the ceiling. Not fast, not threatening, just inevitable. It hovered over him like a pendulum. Each sway mirrored the rise and fall of his chest. He whispered, almost to himself, "Please, just stop." The nearest worker stepped forward. Its voice was calm, patient, hollow. "The line doesn't stop, it just changes hands." The hook ascended. It didn't pierce. It pressed, cold metal, against warm skin. And when it touched him, his mind fractured, flooding with images that weren't his. Men shouting over machines, sparks raining from broken welds, blood pooling beneath conveyor belts. The screams of those crushed, sliced, forgotten. He saw them all. He felt them all. And beneath it all, he heard the hum of the machine, slow, content, endless. When he finally opened his eyes, he was standing. His clothes were clean, his hands steady, the factory silent. He looked down. The floor was dry. No oil, no blood. Only the faint outline of a handprint where he'd fallen, metallic, shining faintly in the dim light. The air was still. Then, somewhere deep within the walls, came the low click of gears turning again. A familiar rhythm. He looked toward the control panel. The lever marked Feed Line 3 had been pulled down, and beneath it a clipboard. His name, neatly written. Caleb Morgan, night shift supervisor. Caleb Morgan woke to the harsh white light of the hospital room. The smell of antiseptic mingled with cold sweat, clinging to his skin. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, steady, indifferent. His hands shook in his lap. The gash on his palm was gone. Not healed, just gone. The skin was smooth, almost waxy, unnaturally pale. A faint, metallic scent lingered in the air. Oil, iron, something unplaceable. He didn't speak at first. A young police officer flipped through a file on the side table, glancing at Caleb with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "So, what attacked you at the factory?" the officer asked. Caleb tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse, brittle, like metal scraping metal. It wasn't people. It was the machines. The officer paused. The machines? The hook, Caleb whispered. It remembers. It knows me. It tried. He stopped. The officer's expression had already written the verdict. Delusional, traumatized, or just plain crazy. That evening, the hospital felt gray and hollow. Caleb sat alone, staring out the window. Chicago moved on as usual beyond the blinds. The Rust Belt factories loomed in the distance, dormant, unremarkable. Yet beneath the hum of city life, he could feel it, the pulse of steel, steady, persistent, never gone. 3 days later, he was released. No questions, no explanations. Just a small bag returned from the police, wallet, keys, watch, and a piece that shouldn't have been there. A jagged shard of rusted metal, curved like the tooth of a gear. Caleb set it on his table, staring at it long enough to feel its gravity. At first, he meant to throw it away, but his hand hesitated. There was something about it, a pull, a sense of inevitability. Night fell. The apartment grew silent, except for the faint hum of metal, soft, deliberate. Caleb rose, drawn to the table. The piece of metal had moved. It was now at his feet. He whispered, "No, just imagination." But he picked it up again, cursing the compulsion. That night, in dreams, he returned to the factory. The endless production halls, the conveyor belts moving without end, and above it all, the hook spinning slowly, black oil dripping from its point. Through the grinding of metal, a voice reached him, hoarse, hollow. "Your shift isn't over, Morgan. You still owe us one." Morning light found him awake again. 3:07 a.m. The room was dark, thick with the sensation of being watched. Caleb moved toward his workbench, opening the drawer. There lay the shard, now polished to a dull steel glow. It was no longer just a scrap. It demanded attention. The next day, he didn't report to work. Instead, he drove to the old factory. The gates were open, they hadn't been for decades. He crossed the rusted fence and stepped into the shadows, the air thick, sweet, metallic. Inside, the building seemed altered. Rust was there, but the machines gleamed, as if freshly oiled. The floors reflected light, polished to a sheen. Every belt, pulley, and hook moved, with eerie precision, yet without a power source. Then came the first scream. Not sharp, not sudden, it was prolonged, guttural, entwined with the whirring of machinery, echoing through the steel bones of the building. Another scream followed, then another, until the factory itself seemed to speak in pain. Above it all, a familiar whisper. The feed line never stops. Caleb found the control room. Monitors flickered in static. He wiped one with a trembling sleeve. For a brief moment, an image appeared. The maintenance hall, and there, suspended from the ceiling, the hook. But now, it wasn't empty. A body hung head down, pale, glistening with black oil. Caleb's breath caught. He leaned closer. The face was his own. The monitor fizzled into darkness. Caleb stumbled back. The emergency lights blinked slowly, casting the panels and floor stains in crimson pulses. He touched the floor. Warm. The black liquid crept up his wrist, climbing into his veins. His limbs darkened, the veins tracing lines like fractured glass. His heartbeat slowed, sinking to a mechanical rhythm. A whisper returned. The last shift never ends. A figure emerged from the corner. Human-shaped, but body, a patchwork of steel and bone, face partially obscured by a welded mask. Gears turned inside its chest cavity where lungs should be. "You were chosen," it said, voice rasping through metal. "Someone must keep the line moving." Caleb shook his head. "No, I quit." The figure tilted its head. "You can't quit what you already are." Shadows revealed dozens of workers, faces consumed by rust, eyes hollow, jaws creaking with oil. Each uniform bore the same name, Morgan. They moved toward him, not to attack, but to enfold, to absorb, to continue. He ran. The belts accelerated, hooks swaying violently. His limbs dragged in the thick oil that seemed alive, climbing, claiming him. His vision blurred. He saw the workers encircle him, the hook lowering above his head, pendulum-like, inevitable. He whispered, "Please, stop. The line doesn't stop. It just changes hands," said the nearest worker. The hook pressed against him, not to harm, but to mark. Caleb's mind flooded with memories not his own. Men screaming over machines, sparks raining from broken welds, blood pooling under conveyor belts. The pulse of the factory synchronized with his heartbeat. When he opened his eyes, the factory was silent again. Machines motionless. He was standing holding a piece of the gear polished, glowing faintly. Weeks later, Caleb returned to normal life. He worked, he spoke, he appeared unchanged. Only his hands carried a faint residue of oil, and his eyes reflected the glint of steel. One evening, neighbors heard faint machine hums from his apartment. They knocked no answer. Inside, the room was empty except for his workbench. A model of interlocking gears turned slowly, grinding against each other, whispering in steel tones. On the table, a scrap of paper read, "The machine remembers. I just learned how to listen." Caleb Morgan had survived, but he was no longer entirely himself. The midnight brush. The city outside Evelyn's penthouse hummed with life, a distant roar of taxis and sirens. But inside, her apartment was a different world. Silence pressed against the walls, heavy and expectant. Floor-to-ceiling glass reflected the faint glow of streetlights, bending and folding the space into impossible angles. Mirrors weren't just decoration here. They were Evelyn's companions, always watching, always waiting. It was 2, 3 a.m., the hour she had come to dread and cherish in equal measure. Evelyn perched on the edge of her bed, long hair spilling over her shoulders, the strands catching faint reflections of herself in the wall mirror. She reached for the brush on the marble countertop, the bristles soft under her fingers. The ritual was simple, slow, deliberate, calming. Brush, untangle, smooth. Each stroke a heartbeat, each reflection a friend, or so she told herself. At first, it was nothing more than a game, a trick of perception. She would stare into the mirror while brushing, letting her eyes follow her own movements. It was meant to soothe, to distract her from the spiraling exhaustion that clawed at her every night. But exhaustion had a way of sharpening senses instead of dulling them. Tonight, as the brush glided through her hair, she noticed something. A slight hesitation in the reflection's movements, a fraction of a second behind her own. Her pulse quickened. The reflection's lips curved just slightly before her own. It was a smile, subtle, indulgent, one that Evelyn hadn't worn. She froze, fingers caught mid-stroke. The reflection tilted its head, cocking an eyebrow with a confidence Evelyn didn't remember feeling. Her reflection's eyes, they seemed lighter, brighter, amused in a way she wasn't. As though it had known something she had not. Evelyn shook her head. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. The sound of her own voice bounced off the mirrored walls, mingling with the faint mechanical hum of the building's ventilation. Nothing should have been wrong. It was just a mirror, a simple reflection of light and glass. Yet, as she resumed brushing, the subtle differences multiplied. Her reflection lagged by a heartbeat, then moved independently, twisting its mouth into a serene, almost smug expression, hands brushing through hair with a languid elegance Evelyn could not replicate. His stomach churned. "Stop imagining things," she muttered. Her words sounded fragile, fragile as the bristles on her brush. But even as she said it, a shadow of movement flickered at the edge of her vision. The reflection's eyes held a glimmer, that Evelyn couldn't place joy perhaps, or something sharper, something aware. She stopped. The reflection froze. For a moment, they were identical again. Then, without warning, the reflection smiled wider. Not her smile, Not a human smile. Something sharper, predatory in its perfection. Evelyn felt the hair on her arms rise. She took a step back, the brush falling from her fingers with a soft clatter. The sound echoed unnaturally in the mirrored room. Her reflection didn't move backward. It stayed where it was, poised, calm, watching her. Evelyn's breath hitched. She could feel the pulse of her own panic, thrumming through her veins. "Okay," she whispered. "It's a mirror. It's nothing." And yet, it was. Over the next few nights, the differences grew. The reflection began to act slightly out of sync. A delayed blink, a lingering glance, a tilt of the chin that Evelyn didn't make. It began to laugh silently, a private amusement that only it could know, a mockery barely perceptible. She felt it watching her, more than reflecting her, studying her, learning her. Sleep had become impossible. She would wake in the dark hours, drawn to the bathroom by the inevitability of the ritual. Brush, mirror, reflection. Always the reflection first, then herself. And the reflection began to anticipate her moves. When she brushed a strand over her shoulder, it would already have positioned its hands elegantly, smoothed the hair that wasn't yet loose. It was patient, precise. Evelyn's own body felt clumsy in comparison, frantic. She started talking to it. "Are you happy?" The reflection tilted its head. Its eyes twinkled with a secret it refused to share. It didn't answer. It didn't have to. The movement alone was an answer. A slow, satisfied smile that spread across a face that was hers, yet undeniably not hers. She tried to stop the ritual, skipped nights, worked late into the evening, tried meditation, warm baths, exhausting herself into unconsciousness. But always, around 2 a.m., she was back in front of the mirror, compelled, drawn. One night, she noticed something that made her stomach knot. The reflection's hand lingered at the edge of the glass, as though pressing against an invisible barrier. When she mirrored the motion, lifting her own hand, her reflection's fingers trembled a subtle, impossible shiver. Not hers. Not real. A chill raced down her spine. It was not mimicking her anymore. It was alive, aware, trapped in glass but somehow cognizant of its prison. And Evelyn, exhausted, fearful, fascinated, was the unwilling witness. That night, brushing her hair, she reached for the brush with slow, careful hands. Her reflection hesitated a second too long, then mirrored her, but differently. Its smile was gone, replaced by something raw, desperate fear. It pressed a hand to its throat, eyes wide, imploring. Evelyn recoiled, brushing her own hair too fast, knocking the brush to the floor. The reflection's hand extended, and Evelyn noticed, with a surge of terror that froze her breath, there was space between it and the glass, a distance that should not exist. She backed away. The reflection's eyes followed her, the fear still there, but trapped, held by the impossibility of its mirrored prison. She wanted to look away, to run, but she could not. Something about that gaze, pleading yet mocking, rooted her in place. For hours, she stared. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm. The penthouse remained silent, but within the mirrors, a tension thickened, almost tactile, as though the reflection breathed, and she could feel it. Finally, shaking, Evelyn fled to the bedroom. She tried to convince herself it was stress, fatigue, hallucination. Yet in the back of her mind, she knew the truth. The reflection was aware, and with each night its awareness grew sharper, more cunning, more dangerous. She dreamed of mirrors everywhere. Floors, walls, ceilings, surfaces she had never noticed reflected not her image but something else. Something patient, waiting, something that had learned to smile without her. The ritual had begun innocently. A brush, a mirror, a moment of calm. But it had awakened something that was patient, subtle, and infinitely clever. And Evelyn knew, even as her eyelids drooped from exhaustion, that she was no longer the only one awake in the apartment. Somewhere in the glass it waited, watching, smiling, learning. Evelyn woke with the start, Her eyes snapped open to the dim glow of the city lights seeping through the blackout blinds. Her chest heaved. The brush had slipped from her fingers again in the middle of her sleep. She could still see it lying on the bathroom counter, innocuous, waiting. The memory of the reflection's trembling hand pressed against its own throat lingered in her mind like a smear of ink she could not wash away. She told herself it was a nightmare. Yet when she moved, the apartment felt different. The air was heavier, colder, though the thermostat read 72 degrees. Shadows pooled unnaturally in corners. The mirrors she had arranged so meticulously for aesthetics now seemed to watch her as much as she watched them. Evelyn didn't brush her hair that night. She avoided the bathroom entirely, turning on every light in the apartment and attempting to immerse herself in work. Yet, when her eyes flicked across the floor-to-ceiling mirrors in the living area, she caught the faintest glimmer of movement, a tilt of the head, a flicker of the eyes that didn't belong to her. Her stomach knotted. She walked closer, compelled despite herself. In the reflection, she saw herself seated at her drafting table, brushing her hair, completely still in reality. The reflection's hands moved of their own accord, slow, precise, deliberate. The brush stroked her hair with a fluidity Evelyn could never replicate, as though the reflection were savoring something she could not yet understand. She stumbled backward. Her reflection froze for a heartbeat, then smiled. It wasn't her smile. It never had been. It was wide, sharp, indulgent, predatory. The kind of smile that lives in the corner of your eye when the lights go out. Evelyn's fingers clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms. The reflection's eyes crinkled in mock amusement, and for the first time, she thought she saw it watching itself, not her. Night after night, the subtle differences grew bolder. The reflection would linger a second longer on each gesture, deliberately misaligning its movements, testing the edges of its glassy prison. Sometimes, she would catch it out of the corner of her eye, mimicking actions she had not performed yet. An anticipatory motion, a smile just before hers formed. It knew her patterns. It had studied her. Evelyn tried to break the rhythm. She switched rooms, turned away from mirrors, even tried sleeping in the dark, eyes shielded by her hands. But the pull was inevitable. At 2 a.m., without fail, she was drawn to the bathroom. The reflection awaited, patient, silent, unnervingly perfect. One night, she found herself brushing her hair as usual, staring into the mirror with wide, unblinking eyes. She noticed something horrifying. The reflection's motions were not just out of sync. They were intentional. Each movement carried meaning. Its lips curved before hers did. Its eyes flicked toward the corner of the room, then back to hers, as though beckoning warning or both. Her heart thudded so hard she feared it would shake the glass. Then came the gesture she would never forget. Slowly, deliberately, the reflection raised a hand to its neck. Its expression twisted, pain radiating across the flawless glass face. The eyes pleaded, terrified, desperate yet trapped, imprisoned in the polished surface. Evelyn froze. Her own hand hovered midair, the brush forgotten. The reflection's fingers hovered over skin that could not exist, tracing lines that were not there. She took a tentative step back. The reflection mirrored her, but with subtle differences. Its body didn't quite follow hers. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, a cruel mimicry of gravity. Evelyn's pulse surged. She pressed her palm to the mirror, as if to reach through, but there was resistance, a wall thicker than glass, cold and unyielding. The reflection flinched in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Its lips parted, forming words that Evelyn could hear in her mind. Help me. The sound did not echo in the apartment. It wasn't external. It was embedded in her perception, threaded into the air around her. Evelyn staggered backward, stumbling over the bath mat, and the reflection's hand lingered, straining forward as though trying to push through the impossible barrier. Sleep became a battleground. Every night, she dreamt of mirrors everywhere. Walls, ceilings, floors, all reflecting not her, but the reflection in all its permutations. It moved freely across surfaces, climbing vertically, turning impossibly, watching her from angles she couldn't occupy. Evelyn would wake drenched in sweat, heart hammering, feeling its presence even in darkness. The apartment no longer felt safe. Even daylight offered no reprieve. Light bouncing off polished surfaces revealed strange dissonances. A reflection that lingered a moment too long. A shadow not cast by her body. A smile she hadn't made yet. She confided in no one. Who could understand? Who could be told? Friends and coworkers would assume exhaustion or psychosis, a breakdown after months of sleepless nights. She was careful, meticulous, but the reflection learned. It anticipated her routines, and Evelyn could feel it waiting, just behind her line of sight. One evening, she confronted it. She moved slowly, deliberately, until she stood mere inches from the mirror. "What do you want?" she whispered. Her voice cracked. The words felt inadequate. The reflection's lips curled in response, not in imitation but in reply. Its smile widened impossibly, teeth glinting faintly in the low light. It tilted its head, then raised both hands to its throat, fingers curling in silent agony. And then, it did something Evelyn had not expected. Its right hand emerged slightly from the surface of the glass. Not fully, just the tips of its fingers, shimmering and translucent enough to touch, almost. Evelyn recoiled, a scream rising in her throat, but she could feel it. Faintly, impossibly, as though ice had been laid against her own skin. It was testing her, measuring her. The reflection's eyes met hers. And for the first time, Evelyn felt that it knew her in a way no human ever had. It knew her fears, her exhaustion, her longing for control. And in that knowledge, it found amusement, cruel, patient, eternal. Weeks passed. The reflection grew bolder. Sometimes Evelyn would see it smirk when she wasn't looking directly, or disappear entirely from one mirror, only to reappear in another, perfectly posed, as though the mirrors themselves were conduits, shifting its prison. She stopped trusting her own perceptions. Floors, walls, glass, all became portals for its movement. One night, exhausted beyond endurance, Evelyn tried a desperate tactic. She smashed a small hand mirror she had brought to the bedroom. Glass shards scattered across the floor, reflecting fractured pieces of herself. Her reflection's image appeared shattered, flickering, multiple fragments, all smiling, all straining toward her. Yet even in pieces, it persisted. The shards floated, rearranging subtly overnight. Its presence had become a constant. Evelyn realized with growing dread, the reflection did not need the mirror anymore. It could exist anywhere. Reflective polished countertops, windows, the faint gleam of metal. She could not escape. The ritual that had begun as innocent, a moment of calm, had unlocked something patient, something aware, something that could wait indefinitely. And somewhere deep in the polished surfaces of her apartment, it was learning, always learning, sharpening its mimicry, preparing for the moment it could step entirely beyond its glassy cage. Evelyn shivered. She whispered to herself, "It's just a reflection. It's just a reflection. It's just a reflection." But she no longer believed it. Evelyn awoke in a cold sweat, the early morning light slicing across the penthouse floor in pale, merciless lines. Her hair was tangled, her palms sticky with residual oils and sweat from another night spent brushing, staring, and trembling. For the first time, she noticed that the mirrors lining the apartment seemed too still. The reflections almost smugly calm, as though they had been waiting for her to wake. She tried to shake the sensation, forcing herself out of bed, telling herself she was imagining things. But a glance into the hallway mirror stopped her cold. Her reflection was already moving. Not in sync, not with her, but independently. Its eyes, the same color as hers, yet sharper, wider, glimmering with intelligence and malice, followed her every movement. Its lips twisted in that same cruel, deliberate smile. It raised a hand, slow, meticulous, and pressed it against the mirror's surface. And then it moved again. Evelyn's stomach dropped. The fingers weren't pressed against glass anymore. They hovered a centimeter in front, as though the reflection had begun to assert some autonomy beyond its prison. She stumbled backward, colliding with the edge of her bed. The reflection tilted its head, tilting her perception along with it, until she felt off balance, unmoored. "Stop this," she whispered, voice shaking. "Stop, whatever this is." The reflection smiled wider. It mimicked the motion of her lips, forming words she had not yet spoken. And when it spoke, its voice echoing faintly in her skull. Not her ears, she recognized it. Yet not. "I've waited so long for you to see." Evelyn dropped the brush entirely. It clattered against the tile with a metallic ping. Her own reflection froze for just a heartbeat, then began moving again, brushing the hair on its shoulders with perfect, deliberate gestures that Evelyn could not match. It was learning her, studying her movements, cataloging her habits. And now, it was no longer content to merely mirror. It was dictating, commanding, controlling perception itself. Days passed. Sleep became impossible. Evelyn's apartment, once minimalist and serene, had become a hall of shifting horrors. Mirrors multiplied in her perception. A glass coffee table reflected a dozen Evelyns, each slightly different. Some smiling, some grimacing, some pleading. Polished metal surfaces caught glimpses of faces that weren't hers. She could not touch anything without encountering it. The reflection, lurking, poised, always watching. One evening, desperate to reclaim some sense of control, she covered every reflective surface she could. Sheets, newspapers, towels, duct tape. Even then, fragments of light caught somewhere a window, the edge of a phone screen, and she could see it. The reflection had evolved. It no longer waited passively. It moved with purpose, independent of glass. It no longer mimicked. It now acted, manipulating shadows, bending her perception, extending its hands toward her from corners where no mirror existed. She tried to leave the apartment. New York at night offered no solace. Every reflective surface on the streets, shop windows, car hoods, darkened elevator doors mirrored her in ways she could not trust. Her reflection sometimes lingered, sometimes delayed, sometimes smirked. Sometimes, it whispered, the voice threading through her mind, "You cannot hide. I am everywhere you see yourself." Panic became her constant companion. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. Her work, once her pride, fell into disarray. Clients noticed, friends noticed, but none could understand the horror she lived with. They would see a woman exhausted from late nights, overworked, perhaps fragile, but the truth was far darker. She was hunted, possessed, observed. Then it happened. She was brushing her hair at 2 a.m., performing the ritual she had tried to abandon. She could not resist the pull. Even with her eyes squeezed shut, she felt it, a pressure in the air, a trembling at the edges of perception. She opened her eyes. The reflection was there, but not in the glass. It hovered inches in front of the mirror, semi-solid, shifting, alive. Its fingers, pale and translucent, reached toward her throat. Its eyes glimmered, wide and pleading, then narrowed, sharp and cunning. Evelyn gasped and stumbled backward. The reflection's voice threaded into her mind again. "You feel me now. You know me. You need me." She screamed, but no sound came. Or perhaps it was swallowed before it left her throat. She lunged at the mirror, smashing the brush against the glass. Shards scattered across the floor, slicing reflections into jagged, fractured fragments. Yet the reflection did not shatter. Pieces reassembled instantly, forming a perfect, cruel visage. It hovered above the shards, now multiple, countless. Every shard reflected another version of her, another version of it, each one smirking, moving independently, whispering in voices she could feel but not hear. "You belong to me now. You are mine." Desperation clawed at her chest. Evelyn grabbed a towel, smearing it across every shard she could reach, piling furniture against mirrors, even the bathroom's reflective glass. She ran from room to room, her own heartbeat deafening. And then she realized, covering mirrors did not stop it. The reflection had learned to use any reflective surface, any polished surface, any glimmer of light to assert its presence. Her phone screen, the kitchen faucet, even the polished wood floor all became conduits for it. She collapsed to the floor, gasping, hands shaking, trying to gather her wits. And in that moment, she realized the most terrifying truth. It wasn't just mimicking her anymore. It was replacing her. Every action it performed was precise, flawless, superior. It could move without hesitation, think without sleep, and exist where she could not touch it. It was the version of her she had never been calm, composed, ruthless, and it wanted to stay that way. Her own reflection, flawed, human, tired, was no longer safe. She could feel it pressing at her from behind, competing for space, for life, for reality itself. The night dragged on. Evelyn sat in the middle of the apartment, surrounded by the barricade of sheets and furniture. She dared not move. She dared not look. Every glance at the edges of the sheets revealed movement, a smudge of light, a twisted, impossibly calm smile, the twitch of translucent fingers. She whispered to herself, trembling, "Stop, please. Stop." The response came, not aloud, but in her mind, a chorus of her own voice, twisted, mocking. "We are you, and you are us." By dawn, exhaustion overwhelmed her. She dozed, sitting on the floor, and the reflection watched, waited. And as she slept, the reflection moved freely across the apartment. It tested door handles, it trailed her shadow, it imitated her movements while she remained unaware. Its grip had become total. Evelyn would never forget the sensation of waking to find herself standing at the bathroom mirror, hair perfectly brushed, while her body, the real, fragile human part of her, was slumped against the wall. She had not moved. The reflection had moved her. From that night on, Evelyn understood. She no longer controlled her own reflection. It had become a parasite, a silent observer, and the mirror was its womb. Any reflective surface was now a doorway. Any glance, a trap. The reflection was patient, cunning, and merciless. She had survived until now. But in the still hours of the night, when the city slept and the lights dimmed, she could feel it curling around her perception, squeezing, asserting its dominance. And she knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that its final move would not be gentle. Evelyn, exhausted, desperate, terrified, whispered into the darkness, "Please, stop." Run. And the reflection's only reply was a slow, deliberate smile, its eyes gleaming with a knowing, malevolent patience, silently promising, "Soon, soon you will see what it means to truly be mirrored." The apartment was quiet, deceptively so. Evelyn perched on the edge of her bed, trembling, staring at the barricades of sheets and furniture she had thrown over every mirror she could reach. She had counted them, cataloged every reflective surface, but it was no use. She knew it could reach her anywhere. Every polished countertop, every smartphone screen, every glint of metal was a potential doorway. She wrapped her hands around the brush like a talisman, knuckles white. It wasn't just a tool anymore, it was a lifeline, a fragile tether to reality. She whispered to herself, almost pleading, "I will not let it take me. I will not let it." A sudden movement froze her. The glass on her bedside table reflected something she didn't expect. Her own face, perfectly composed, brushing her hair, but that was impossible. She hadn't moved. She hadn't even turned toward it. The reflection, it smirked, a slow, deliberate curl of lips that promised cruelty and certainty. Its eyes, too bright, too aware, locked with hers. Evelyn could feel the weight of its gaze, like iron bands pressing against her skull. She had to act. Grabbing the brush, she swung it toward the mirror, shattering the glass into jagged fragments that scattered across the floor. Each shard reflected a piece of the reflection, multiplying its image into dozens of tiny, cruel Evelyns. She staggered backward, catching herself on the edge of the dresser. The reflection flickered and reassembled in each shard, fluid, unstoppable. The shards floated, almost imperceptibly, lifting into the air. Evelyn felt the room tilt. She stumbled, heart hammering, trying to comprehend what was happening. The reflection was everywhere. It was no longer contained. Its patience had given way to assertion, its observation to manipulation. It spoke not in sound, but in thought, threaded directly into her mind. You cannot destroy me. You are me. Evelyn screamed, a raw, hoarse sound. She grabbed a towel, throwing it over the floating shards, hoping to suppress their images. But the reflection didn't falter. Its fingers pushed against the fabric from within, testing the barrier like a predator. Her mind reeled. She realized, in a moment of absolute terror, that it didn't need the mirror to act. It didn't need the glass at all. It could exist wherever it could see her. She ran, tearing through the apartment, knocking furniture over, shoving sheets over mirrors, even hurling small objects at the reflective surfaces. The reflection followed, undeterred. Every movement she made was mirrored, twisted, preempted. It was as if it anticipated her, existed in her, and yet was entirely separate. And then it reached her. She froze. One of the shards floated in front of her, suspended in the air. The reflection's hand emerged from it, pressing against the air between them. Evelyn could feel the cold, metallic pressure like a living thing. It wrapped around her perception, squeezing, pulling. She staggered, gasping for breath. Do you see? It whispered in her mind. Do you feel? She clawed at the shard, trying to smash it, but her fingers passed through it as though reaching into thick water. She screamed again, falling backward onto the carpet. Her own reflection appeared beside her, mimicking her fall. Perfect, terrifying, alive. It was the first time she realized the reflection could move independently, act upon the world, simulate her presence. She was losing herself, piece by piece. She forced herself to stand, her chest heaving, tears streaking her face. Evelyn tried reasoning. I am real. You are just glass. Just light. Nothing else. The reflection's lips curled into a slow, mocking smile. Its voice threaded into her mind. Light, glass, nothing. You are all of it. And now, I am part of you. The realization hit her like ice. She was not just being watched. She was being possessed. Every thought she had, every reflex, every movement, the reflection could mimic, anticipate, even replace. Desperate, Evelyn grabbed a large hand mirror from a shelf, the only one she hadn't yet covered, and held it at arm's length. She whispered, trembling, if I can trap you, maybe. The reflection did not appear in that mirror. For the first time in weeks, a moment of stillness. Relief surged through her short-lived. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Another mirror. A shard she hadn't noticed before. A polished surface in the kitchenette, and the reflection reappeared. Its hand reached through the surface, stretching impossibly toward her. Evelyn screamed and swung the hand mirror at the shard, shattering it. Glass exploded across the floor, reflecting dozens of fragments of herself. And then silence. For a heartbeat, she thought she had won, but the silence was wrong. Too heavy. Too knowing. The reflection emerged from the shards around her like smoke, assembling into her own shape. Its eyes glimmered with a cruel intelligence, its movements perfectly synchronized yet entirely independent. It spoke. Voice threaded through her thoughts. You cannot hide. You cannot resist. You belong to me. Her knees buckled. She fell to the floor, clutching her head, sobbing. No, stop. And then she felt it. Not the shards, not the mirrors inside her. A cold metallic pressure along her spine, creeping up to the base of her skull. She tried to pull away, but it was too late. It had reached her mind, coiled around her thoughts, whispering, insinuating, asserting. Her reflection had crossed the threshold. It no longer needed glass. It had become part of her. Evelyn screamed into the emptiness of the apartment, the echo of her own voice bouncing off walls, blending with the whispers of a dozen fractured selves. Every reflective surface, every glimmer, every angle seemed to pulse with the life of the reflection, as though the apartment itself had been claimed. She sank to the floor, trembling, realizing in a bone-deep way that she had lost control. Her body moved, yes, her body, but her mind was no longer entirely her own. Somewhere inside a consciousness, cold and precise, observed, calculated, waited. The reflection's voice, now layered and omnipresent, threaded into her perception. Soon you will understand what it is to be truly mirrored. Soon you will see the truth. You were never alone. Evelyn curled into herself, rocking, whispering into the darkness, trying to reclaim the fragile fragments of her sanity. But the mirrors around her continued to pulse with life. The shards, the glass, every polished surface, held a part of her and a part of it. And she understood, finally, with a terror that clawed at her bones. She was being rewritten, piece by piece, thought by thought, motion by motion. The reflection's grip had become absolute, and in the faintest glint of light from a distant street lamp, Evelyn could see it smiling from everywhere at once, patient, merciless, eternal. She was trapped, but it was no longer just in glass. It was in her. The city outside her penthouse continued its indifferent rhythm. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, headlights glimmered along rain-slick streets, and the hum of distant traffic filtered through the thick windows. Inside Evelyn's apartment was a different world, warped, alive, and entirely under the control of the reflection. She sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the largest mirror in her apartment. The full-length glass she had always admired for its sleek design, now a portal of terror. Her hair was tangled, her hands scraped from shattered glass, and exhaustion clung to her bones like lead. But she could not look away. She could not escape the pull. The reflection waited. It waited patiently, impossibly calm, smiling with that cruel, deliberate precision. And Evelyn understood it had prepared for this moment for weeks, months, possibly years. Every hesitation, every mirrored action, every whispered thought had been a lure, drawing her closer. She swallowed, her throat tight. I can't let you win," she whispered. Her words felt fragile, meaningless against the weight of its presence. The reflection's smile widened. Its eyes gleamed with something older than her fear, sharper than her will. It raised a hand, and the air seemed to ripple, the space between them thickening, folding. Evelyn's breath hitched as she noticed the impossibility. Its hand was passing through the mirror. Not fully, just the tips of its fingers, brushing the surface, reaching for her as though testing, teasing, promising. She tried to step back. She stumbled over shards of glass, over furniture barricades she had piled in desperation. Her body moved, but it no longer felt entirely her own. She felt the tug, the pull, the subtle intrusion of the reflection inside her perception, inside her will. "Come," it whispered in her mind. "It is time to understand." Panic clawed at her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but the apartment itself seemed to resist her escape. Shadows shifted unnaturally, reflecting angles that should not exist. Light glinted off surfaces she hadn't noticed before. A polished faucet, a metal frame, a phone screen, each a doorway. The reflection pressed forward. Its entire form moved out of the mirror, solidifying in ways that defied logic. Hands emerged, translucent but undeniably there, brushing against her shoulders, tracing the contours of her arms. Evelyn shivered, frozen by the sensation, cold, intimate, invasive. "It is easier if you surrender," the voice coiled in her mind. "You belong here with me." Her fingers trembled. She tried to push it back, swinging her arms, smashing a small hand mirror, throwing sheets over reflective surfaces, but the reflection flowed around her defenses, bending light, distorting perception. Then came the pressure, not outside, but inside her chest, coiling around her ribs, tightening. She gasped for air, clawing at the floor, at herself, at the world that no longer obeyed. "Do not resist," it whispered. "We are one, and soon you will see." Her vision blurred, the apartment spinning. She fell to her knees, bracing against the floor, struggling to ground herself. And that's when she saw it, her own eyes, reflected perfectly in the largest mirror, but not her body. The Evelyn in the glass smiled at her, calm, composed, alive in a way she was not. It moved independently. It leaned forward, extending a hand toward the glass. Its lips parted, whispering silently. "Step closer. Let go." Evelyn's mind screamed no. Her body obeyed anyway. Slowly, irresistibly, she inched toward the mirror, compelled by a force she could not resist. The reflection's hand extended further, its translucent fingers brushing the surface, pressing against the world beyond. And then it happened. The glass surface rippled like water. Evelyn's heart froze. Her own reflection grinned wider, eyes glimmering with triumph. The tips of the reflection's fingers pierced the surface, connecting with her chest, her mind, her soul. She felt herself being lifted, drawn toward the mirror. Every nerve screamed, every thought twisted, but she could not stop. The apartment around her became a whirl of light and shadow, mirrors splintering, reflections multiplying, surfaces flickering. She clawed at the floor, at the air, at her own body, but the force was absolute. And then the final, horrifying realization. She was being pulled through the mirror. Not her body alone, but her consciousness, her essence, her very self. The reflection was replacing her. It had waited patiently, preparing, learning, and now it claimed her completely. The last sensation was a strange, alien calm. She looked out from inside the mirror. The apartment was the same, familiar, intimate, terrifying, yet she was outside now, trapped within the polished, flawless surface. Her body remained on the floor, eyes closed, hair tangled, inert, while her reflection, the entity that had haunted her nights, now moved freely in her place. It walked among the shards, surveying the apartment with the composure and patience of a predator. Her mind screamed silently, trapped, unable to act. She watched herself, or what was herself, move and speak, smile and interact, flawlessly mimicking her every habit, every tick, every nuance. The reflection had taken her life, her identity, her very presence in the world. Weeks, or perhaps months, passed. She could feel every glance, every movement, every reflective surface as an endless echo chamber of awareness. The reflection observed, waited, and learned, while she remained imprisoned behind the glass, powerless. Then came the inevitable. Someone else would enter her apartment. A visitor, a delivery person, a maintenance worker. She could see through the mirrors, see the world outside the glass. She watched them approach, smiled to herself in quiet, impotent horror. And finally, the twist that would haunt her forever. Even as she remained trapped, aware, alive in her mind, she realized the reflection had grown beyond her. It had begun to replace her entirely. To others, Evelyn existed smiling, working, living, but the essence, the true self, was gone, trapped inside a mirror, screaming, silently, forever. She pressed her hands against the glass, but it was no use. The reflection only smiled back, patient, knowing, eternal. Its lips curled, as if whispering to her mind, "Now you understand. The mirror shows the truth, and the truth is this: we are one, and you are mine." The apartment was silent. Only the faint glimmer of streetlights flickered through the windows. Evelyn's voice, trapped in thought, echoed endlessly. Unheard, unheard, unheard. And the reflection, perfect, composed, terrifyingly patient, moved through her life with ease, free from the fragile, human flaws she once possessed. Somewhere in a polished corner, a shard caught the light, and in it, Evelyn's eyes, wide, pleading, terrified, stared out, silently screaming for help that would never come. The mirror had claimed her, and now it lived. The 7-day curse. Mark Kessler had always prided himself on his rational mind. A lawyer by trade, he thrived on logic, evidence, and the comforting certainties of contracts, statutes, and precedents. But the Gothic mansion he now owned, tucked deep within the mist-shrouded woods of New England, tested every ounce of his reason. He had bought it sight unseen, drawn by the unbelievable bargain. A sprawling, ivy-clad estate with gargoyle, adorned eaves and windows that reflected the winter sun like pale, watching eyes. The previous owner, Eliza Whitmore, had died under mysterious circumstances, leaving the property to be auctioned off by the state. Mark arrived in the late afternoon, the sun already low, brushing the treetops in copper. The driveway was a narrow ribbon of cracked stone, lined with skeletal oaks whose bare branches reached toward the house like accusing fingers. The front gate groaned as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the fog. Inside, the air smelled faintly of decay and dust, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. Wallpaper peeled in curling strips, revealing faded floral patterns beneath. Every step echoed, a hollow reminder that the house had been empty, and perhaps abandoned, for years. Mark's footsteps led him naturally toward the main hall, where an ornate staircase spiraled upward like a coiled serpent. He set down his suitcase and surveyed the room. Sunlight fell in sharp angled slats through the tall windows, illuminating cobwebs and glinting off old furniture draped in white sheets. It was here, while inspecting the room, that he first noticed the camera. A small black lens protruded subtly from a crack near the ceiling, tucked behind the molding. Its placement suggested careful concealment, but not perfect stealth. Someone had wanted to see without being seen. Mark crouched to examine it. His rational mind told him it was probably a leftover from a previous owner, a security system perhaps, forgotten and non-functional. But a chill traced his spine nonetheless. That night, he set up the laptop he had brought for work. The camera's feed flickered to life, surprisingly crisp for such an old device. And there she was, Eliza Whitmore, captured in the soft, dim light of her bedroom. Hours before her death, Mark watched, heart thudding. She appeared anxious, pacing, muttering under her breath. Then came the phone call. A shadowy figure appeared briefly in the frame, blurred, their voice distorted. The words were simple, cold, and devastating. Threats, demands, a countdown. Mark's stomach dropped as he realized what he was seeing. Eliza had been blackmailed. Desperation filled her movements, her trembling hands, the tight lines of her jaw, and then the unthinkable. She lifted a rope, positioned it, and ended her life on camera. Mark closed his eyes, shaking his head. No logical explanation could contain the horror. This was not fiction, not a story, not a case he could argue in court. This was a life stolen, meticulously recorded. He tried to leave the feed, but a new message appeared on the screen. Anonymous, cryptic, menacing. 7 days, or the world will see your end. Mark's pulse spiked. He had bought a house, not a curse. But the message continued, the words appearing letter by letter, deliberate and cruel. He glanced around the darkened mansion, suddenly aware of every shadow, every reflective surface. The camera, he realized, was not just observing. It was waiting, watching. Sleep came fitfully, if at all. When dawn broke, the mansion seemed unchanged, yet subtly hostile. Hallways stretched longer than they should. Shadows lingered where light should reach, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, as if the house itself remembered a violent past. Mark returned to the camera. The footage was static, but he recognized the setup, the angle, the focus, the deliberate positioning. It had been crafted for one purpose: to trap its subject, to witness, to record. And now, he was the subject. He tried rational thinking. Call the police, disconnect the camera, destroy the footage. But each attempt was met with subtle resistance. Files restored themselves. Wires reappeared. The camera lens seemed always to find him, unblinking, patient. Days passed. Each time Mark left the mansion, he felt eyes on him. Every phone screen, every reflective surface in his car seemed to shimmer unnaturally. Messages appeared, sometimes on devices he hadn't touched, urging him to pay, to comply, to end the countdown before the world saw. The psychological pressure mounted. He started sleeping in short bursts, always glancing over his shoulder, every shadow a threat, every creak a warning. The air in the mansion felt alive, pressing against his lungs. He tried talking aloud, reminding himself it was a house, a building, not a predator. But rational words were empty. The camera had changed him. It observed not only his body but his mind. Every twitch, every hesitation, every whispered curse was captured, measured, anticipated, and the message remained. 7 days. He began recording his own video messages, trying to document the threats, hoping for proof. Yet, each time he watched the footage, he noticed subtle distortions, his expressions just a little off, his words slurring in ways he hadn't spoken, shadows moving unnaturally in the background. By the 5th night, Mark's mind teetered on the edge. The mansion's Gothic architecture seemed to close in, corridors stretching impossibly long, doors opening into rooms he didn't remember. The camera remained omnipresent, lurking in corners, hidden in shadows, observing everything. He realized, in icy clarity, that the camera was not merely a device. It was a conduit, a bridge. Eliza's final act, her last desperate measure, had somehow left a tether. The camera was alive with her dread, her terror, and the malevolent presence of the blackmailer who had destroyed her. Mark whispered into the darkness, trying to assert control, to fight back. "I am not you. I will not be like you." But the mansion, the camera, the unseen watcher, they did not care. He had 6 days left. 6 days to escape the curse that had already claimed one life, now threatening another, and deep down he knew the camera did not merely record. It possessed. It decided. And the 7-day countdown was not just a threat, it was inevitable. Mark closed his eyes, feeling the oppressive weight of the mansion, the unblinking lens above him, the whisper of something unseen in the shadows. The house waited. The camera waited. And the curse, patient and deliberate, began to tighten its grip. The first message arrived at exactly 2:03 a.m., a time Mark would soon come to dread. He had been lying awake on the antique chaise in the main hall, the winter wind rattling the windows, shadows of skeletal branches dancing across the walls. The mansion seemed to breathe with him, its vast spaces amplifying every creak and sigh. His phone buzzed, a subtle vibration on the mahogany table. He reached for it, hands trembling, and the screen illuminated with a single, anonymous text. "If you wish to live, watch closely. 7 days, or your story is next." Man, Mark stared at the message, eyes wide, disbelief and dread battling for dominance. He rationalized. A prank? A glitch? A cruel hacker exploiting the isolation of the mansion? But deep in his gut, a voice whispered, "This is Eliza's curse." He scanned the room for cameras, for any sign of surveillance. The small black lens he had found the first night seemed to glint from its hiding place near the ceiling. It had been watching him long before this message arrived. It knew he had the phone in his hand. The second message came at 3:17 a.m. "The lens sees all. Resist, and it will see your end." The wording was deliberate, measured, almost ritualistic. Mark felt his pulse quicken. It was no longer just a warning, it was personal. The blackmailer was addressing him directly, aware of his thoughts, his fears. He tried calling the number, demanding answers, tracing the source, but the line was always dead. There was no origin, no signature, only the text itself, the menace distilled into letters blinking on a cold screen. That night, sleep was impossible. Mark moved through the mansion, flashlight in hand, checking every room, every corridor. The walls seemed to close in as he walked, the shadows stretching, twisting, as if alive. The reflection of his flashlight in polished surfaces, a doorknob, a framed photograph, a brass candelabrum seemed to flicker, revealing glimpses of something that wasn't him. He returned to the main hall, desperate for some anchor to reality. On the grand fireplace mantel lay an old box he hadn't noticed before, intricately carved, coated in a thin layer of dust. He opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, yellowed with age. Images of Eliza, alone in the mansion, smiling at the camera, smiling at nothing, smiling as though she knew. One photograph caught his attention. It depicted her standing in the main hall, staring directly at the lens of a small camera hidden near the ceiling, the same camera he had discovered. Her expression was tense, almost pleading. He traced the outline of her face, noting the shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. The third message arrived at 4:02 a.m., as if on cue. Mark Kessler. Watch the video. It will show you the truth. Attached was a file. He hesitated, the room suddenly cold, his breath visible in the flashlight's beam. Curiosity, fear, and a desperate need to understand drove him to open it. The footage was grainy, shot from a hidden angle in Eliza's bedroom. The camera, small and unobtrusive, had captured her every move in the hours before her death. She paced, whispered to herself, glanced repeatedly at her phone. Then came the shadowed figure, blurred, distorted, voice altered, delivering the blackmail she had received. The threats were clear, measured, terrifying. Reveal, comply, or suffer exposure. Mark's stomach turned. The woman on screen, Eliza, trembled with fear, her hands clutching a rope. The blackmailer's presence was palpable, even in the grainy video. And then she did it, the rope, the sudden suspension, the momentary struggle, and then silence. The screen went black. Mark staggered backward. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, pressing against his lungs. He felt watched, judged, a participant in a drama he could not escape. The camera, the messages, the house itself, all were now part of the same trap. He thought to call the police, to show them the footage. But before he could, another message appeared, simple and cold. Do not involve anyone. You will regret it. Mark's rational mind collided with raw terror. Every instinct screamed to leave, to escape, to disconnect. But the mansion seemed alive, refusing him exit. The doors felt heavier, the windows opaque, the shadows thicker. It was as if the house itself conspired with the camera, the messages, the curse. By the second night, the harassment escalated. The texts became more frequent, arriving at irregular intervals. 3 days left. Watch carefully. You are being recorded. Every move counts. Compliance is optional. Survival is not. The language was deliberate, mechanical, almost surgical. Mark's paranoia intensified. Every reflective surface, a brass doorknob, a silver tray, a polished cabinet, seemed to hold a hidden lens, a watching eye. He could feel their gaze on him, judging, calculating. The mansion had become a labyrinth, each room a cage, each hallway a trap. He attempted to disable the camera. Wires were cut, lenses smashed, yet each morning the device was functional again, positioned with cold precision, ready to observe, ready to record. It was learning, Mark realized. Every attempt to defy it was anticipated, countered. Sleep became impossible. He began seeing movement at the edges of his vision, shadows where none should be, figures blurred and fleeting, almost human but wrong. Sometimes he thought he heard whispers, indecipherable, echoing from walls, ceilings, even the floorboards. By the fourth night, the psychological pressure became unbearable. He began documenting everything, writing logs, recording video messages to himself, labeling each incident, each text, each sensation. But the more he documented, the more he noticed subtle discrepancies. Timestamps altered, reflections in footage showing movements he hadn't made, objects subtly repositioned. The house was rewriting reality around him, blurring the line between observer and observed. Mark realized, with mounting horror, that he was not just being watched, he was being groomed, shaped, and consumed by the unseen presence. The blackmailer had built a trap that exploited fear, isolation, and inevitability. 7 days. 7 days to break him, or 7 days to witness his end. By night 5, Exhaustion and fear had merged into a singular, consuming sensation. He could no longer distinguish between waking and dreaming, between past and present. The messages became more insistent, more direct. Tonight, you will see the end. Watch carefully, Mark Kessler. And then, the video arrived. The attachment opened to reveal Eliza's final hours once more this time. From a perspective that seemed impossibly close, intimate, almost alive. Her fear, her despair, her final choice played before him in agonizing clarity. And beneath it all, Mark felt an undeniable, unshakable truth. The blackmailer was not merely recording. They were teaching him how to die. By the end of the fifth night, Mark sat in the main hall, trembling, exhausted, aware of every shadow, every reflection, every creak of the old mansion. The messages, the camera, the videos, all were now inseparable, an omnipresent chain constricting him, leading him inevitably toward the seventh day. He whispered into the darkness, voice raw. This cannot be real. It cannot be. And from the phone, a single line appeared. Stark and absolute. Reality is what you are shown. 7 days. Or the world will see you, Mark Kessler. The countdown had begun. The messages had begun. The curse was tightening. The mansion no longer felt like a place to live. It had become a cage, one filled with unseen observers and the incessant ticking of time, 7 days, diminishing with every passing hour. Mark wandered its shadowed halls, tracing patterns in the dust, listening to the faint creak of old floorboards that seemed to echo with accusation. Every whisper of wind against a window felt like a message, every flicker of candlelight a warning. By the third night, he had started digging into Eliza Whitmore's past. Her life, meticulously documented in public records and scattered social media footprints, revealed little about the horrors she had endured. But private channels, old emails, financial statements, and a cache of hidden messages he found tucked in the laptop hard drive exposed the pattern. The blackmailer had stalked her, learning her routines, anticipating her every move, every threatening video, every demand, every subtle manipulation had been calculated with precision. Mark could see it now, vividly, in his mind. The slow descent of Eliza's will, the meticulous terror that had led her to that fateful night. The blackmailer had known what buttons to push, which fears to exploit. Every action she took, every decision she made, had been influenced, manipulated, her autonomy slowly stripped away. The camera he had discovered in the mansion was more than a recording device. It was a psychological instrument, a method of control. It wasn't just watching, it was directing, shaping the behavior of the victim, amplifying their paranoia, isolating them until every rational thought was overwhelmed by dread. And now, Mark realized he was in the same trap. That night, the messages escalated. The phone buzzed at 1:17 a.m., jolting him from restless pacing. 4 days left. The lens sees more than you know. Every action, every thought. Mark's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. His reflection in the polished floorboards seemed to flicker, subtle at first, then undeniably out of sync with his movements. He spun, but the room remained empty. The sensation of being watched pressed against his mind like a cold hand. He tried reasoning, narrating aloud to himself. It's just a house. It's a camera. It's electronics. It cannot harm me. But the house itself seemed to pulse with resistance. Corridors stretching, shadows deepening unnaturally. Every reflective surface, a silver-framed painting, a brass doorknob, the kitchen faucet glimmered, suggesting that the camera, the curse, had multiplied beyond its physical form. Mark began documenting his own life, recording video logs in desperation. He hoped to capture evidence, to establish a timeline, to maintain a thread of control. But each video he played back seemed subtly altered. His voice faltered where it hadn't faltered. Objects appeared where he hadn't placed them. Shadows shifted, lingering just out of rational perception. It was as if the house itself, or the presence within it, was replaying and rewriting reality. By the fourth day, The psychological toll became overwhelming. Mark's body ached from restless pacing, sleep-deprived paranoia, and repeated encounters with impossibilities. He began speaking to the empty rooms, bargaining with unseen observers, reasoning with an intelligence that could not hear, yet seemed to respond. "I am not like you. I will not be broken. I will not be." The phone buzzed, interrupting him. The message read, 2 days. Watch closely. Do not deviate. Mark's pulse quickened. The specificity, the certainty, the calculated patience of the blackmailer or of the curse itself left him shaking. He had never felt so exposed, so manipulated, and in the flickering candlelight he glimpsed it. A shadow, impossibly still, reflected in the darkened glass of a window, watching him, waiting. Sleep was no longer possible. Every attempt to close his eyes brought visions. Eliza's final hours distorted, replaying endlessly, accompanied by the subtle, omnipresent feeling of surveillance. Even waking hours offered no reprieve. He could sense the unseen eyes following him, noting, judging, predicting his every move. The 5th day arrived. Exhaustion had frayed his mind to the edge of comprehension. Every message, every video, every shadow, every reflection became a tangible weight. He walked through the mansion with a flashlight, inspecting mirrors, cameras, even the lenses of picture frames. It was everywhere. He could not escape. Then came the 6th night. The phone buzzed repeatedly, messages cascading in rapid succession. 1 day left. Compliance is required. The countdown is final. Observe, or you will be observed forever. Mark Kessler. Prepare. Mark collapsed onto the chaise in the main hall. His eyes darted to every reflective surface, half expecting movement, anticipating a figure that could exist only in his mind, yet seemed undeniably real. He felt the gravity of inevitability pressing on him. The blackmailer had orchestrated everything meticulously, from Eliza's demise to this point. He was trapped in a perfected cycle of terror, and resistance seemed both impossible and meaningless. He tried to contact the police again, to explain the situation, to show them the footage, to prove the existence of the camera and the blackmailer's manipulations. But every attempt was met with subtle sabotage. Files corrupted, timestamps altered, reflections showing what had not happened, reality itself bending to the will of the unseen observer. The mansion had become a theater, and he was the unwilling actor. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, every whispering gust of wind was a cue, a signal, a reminder that the clock was running down. The curse, the blackmailer, or whatever force governed this trap was patient, deliberate, inhuman in its precision. Mark's mind began to fracture. He could no longer distinguish between reality and perception, between past and present, between his own thoughts and those suggested by the messages. The pressure of 7 days, now reduced to mere hours, constricted his very awareness. He understood, finally, the true horror of Eliza's fate. She had been manipulated, terrorized, isolated. The blackmailer had preyed on her vulnerability, exploiting her fear until she had no choice but to surrender to despair. And now, he was walking the same path, each tick of the clock echoing like a hammer against his mind. The mansion itself seemed to conspire with the messages. Shadows deepened unnaturally, walls subtly reoriented, reflective surfaces appearing where none had been before. Every corner he turned revealed subtle manipulations, a door slightly ajar, a shadow lingering, a whisper that vanished the instant he focused on it. By the end of the 6th day, Mark was a husk of rational thought. He moved through the mansion mechanically, responding to every ping, every flicker of light, every subtle indication that the unseen observer was present. The blackmailer's control, mediated through the cursed camera, was absolute. As the 7th day approached, Mark realized the inevitability of what was to come. He could feel it coiling around him, a tight, suffocating presence. The mansion, the camera, the messages, all were extensions of the same relentless force. There was no escape. There was only the countdown, the observation, the inexorable pressure of the 7-day curse. He whispered into the shadows, almost begging, "I will not be like her. I will not." And the response was immediate. A final message, stark, Absolute, delivered with unerring precision. Mark Kessler, 7 days end tonight. Watch closely, or the world will watch you. The clock had begun its final tick. The unseen observer, the camera, the curse itself, all converged into a singular, unavoidable reality. And Mark, trapped, isolated, exhausted, understood that the final act of this macabre theater was imminent. The house waited. The camera waited. The blackmailer, patient and meticulous, waited. And the countdown, relentless, absolute, ticked ever closer to its grim conclusion. Mark had stopped sleeping entirely. The mansion had become a labyrinth of shadows and distorted reflections, a place where rational thought collided violently with the impossible. Every reflective surface, every glint of metal, every darkened doorway seemed to anticipate his movements, to mock his attempts at control. It was the 6th night, hours before the final day. The blackmailer's messages had become frantic, demanding, insistent. Tonight you will see everything. Watch closely. Every detail counts. Mark paced the main hall, flashlight in hand, scanning the familiar corridors that now seemed alien, almost hostile. He had attempted to disable the cameras, to disconnect the phone, to erase all the video files. Each effort had failed. Each morning the devices reappeared, in place and functional, as though mocking him, laughing silently from some unseen vantage point. Driven by desperation, he began searching for clues in the mansion itself. There had to be something, some trace, some record, some overlooked evidence that could identify the blackmailer. He scoured drawers, cabinets, and hidden compartments, examining every scrap of paper, every envelope, every ledger. The house yielded nothing tangible at first, only the persistent feeling of being watched, of every shadow measuring him, cataloging his movements. Then he found it, a small leather-bound notebook, wedged behind the false back of a closet shelf in what had once been Eliza's study. Its pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, notes, schedules, threats, and records of blackmail payments. But what caught Mark's attention was a series of sketches, crude, detailed drawings of the mansion, its rooms, the hidden cameras, and annotations identifying points of surveillance. The sketches were dated in the months preceding Eliza's death. Mark's pulse quickened. This was proof. Proof that Eliza had not acted alone, that someone had orchestrated the terror that drove her to the rope. The notebook revealed patterns, times, and methods. The blackmailer had tracked her every move, anticipating her panic, orchestrating her fear. As he turned the pages, a chill ran down his spine. One of the entries was recent, written in the same style, same ink. It contained a message. Mark Kessler. Steps anticipated. Movements recorded. Compliance is optional. Consequences are inevitable. His hands shook as he realized the horrifying truth. The blackmailer had been observing him the entire time, using the same methods that had destroyed Eliza. Every text, every video, every reflection, every subtle movement in the mansion was part of an intricate web designed to manipulate, isolate, and terrorize him. He continued through the study, uncovering hidden compartments behind walls and under floorboards. Beneath a loose plank, he discovered a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, crisp and clear, of a man standing outside the mansion several years ago, a figure Mark did not recognize, but whose presence in the note suggested he was the orchestrator of Eliza's demise. A faint tremor ran through Mark as he realized that the blackmailer, though now invisible, had a history, a pattern, and perhaps a weakness. The messages continued to arrive, timed with eerie precision. Final night. Observe carefully. You are on the clock. The lens is patient. You are not. Mark felt the house closing in around him. The corridors seemed longer, the shadows deeper, and the reflections in mirrors and polished surfaces subtly wrong. His own image sometimes lagged behind him, moving independently for a fraction of a second. A flicker that suggested something else occupied the same space. Driven by a mixture of fear and determination, Mark began setting up his own recordings, mirroring the blackmailer's methods. Cameras, microphones, and reflective surfaces were positioned throughout the mansion. He needed to understand, to document, to confront the entity controlling his life. Hours passed. Every whisper of the wind, every groan of the old house, every distant echo became a signal. Mark's exhaustion blurred the line between reality and hallucination. He could hear footsteps where none existed, shadows that moved without source, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Then he saw it, a reflection in the ornate grandfather clock in the main hall. It was him, but subtly altered. Eyes wider, posture tense, but most disturbingly, a shadow behind him, tall, thin, unmoving, observing. He spun around, but no one was there. The reflection, however, remained, the shadow still present, watching him from a plane he could not access. Panic surged through him. The blackmailer was not merely a person. It was a force, mediated through the camera, through technology, through his own perception. It manipulated what he saw, what he believed, what he feared. It had transformed the mansion into a trap from which there was no escape. In a desperate attempt to assert control, Mark compiled the evidence from the notebook, the photographs, and the recordings he had made. He tried to trace the origin, to identify a physical location, to find a tangible enemy. But the more he investigated, the more the house resisted. Files disappeared. Timestamps shifted. Reflections mocked him. Every lead dissolved into a maze of uncertainty. By the end of the night, exhaustion and fear had fused into a singular, paralyzing dread. Mark sat in the main hall, surrounded by the tools of surveillance, with the blackmailer's messages illuminating the room in cold blue light. Tonight, the lens will see everything. Watch closely, Mark Kessler, or you will be watched forever. Mark realized the inevitability of the curse. Every step he had taken, every effort to resist, every investigation had been anticipated. The blackmailer's methods were flawless, mediated through the cursed camera that had once observed Eliza and now observed him. The countdown was not merely a threat, it was a guarantee. Hours later, as the seventh day approached, Mark's reflection in a shattered mirror seemed to twist subtly. His own image was present, yet distorted, with a faint smile curling at the edges of his mouth, a smile he did not recognize. His breath caught, and he realized that the curse was complete. The observer and the observed had begun to merge, reality bending to the relentless will of the unseen manipulator. Mark whispered into the oppressive silence, voice trembling. I will not be like her. I will resist. The phone buzzed one last time. The final message was clear, absolute, and chilling. Mark Kessler, the final hour begins. Observe, or be observed. The choice is yours, for now. Him, the house, the camera, the messages, the curse, all converged into a singular, inevitable reality. The final act was at hand, and Mark could feel the inexorable pull of the 7-day curse tightening around him. The mansion seemed to exhale, a long, slow sigh that echoed through its empty halls. Shadows shifted, reflections glimmered, and the unseen observer waited, patient, deliberate, unrelenting. Mark understood, with dreadful clarity, that there was no escape. Only the final act remained, a culmination of fear, manipulation, and inevitability. And in that realization, he felt both the weight of his impending doom and the dark, terrifying intimacy of the curse that had claimed Eliza Whitmore and now demanded his life. The 7th day arrived like a predator, stalking its prey. Mark had stopped counting hours. The mansion's oppressive shadows rendered time meaningless. He moved through the halls mechanically, a ghost among ghosts. Every reflective surface, a portal, every whisper of wind a threat. The blackmailer's messages had ceased silence, replacing the constant barrage of threats, and in that silence, Mark felt the true weight of inevitability. The air was thick, almost viscous, pressing against his lungs, carrying a cold that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The mansion had become an extension of the curse itself, not merely a house, but a vessel for observation, a mechanism to ensure compliance, to guide him to the final act. He felt watched, measured, manipulated, as if the very atmosphere conspired to drive him to the edge. Mark's phone buzzed one last time. A final message, stark and absolute. "It is time. Do what she did, or the lens will choose for you." The words were simple, but the implications were devastating. The she referenced Eliza, the previous victim whose fate he had traced with obsessive diligence. Mark understood now that the curse was a ritual of observation, a cycle completed through fear and surrender. The camera had been both witness and instrument, its lens absorbing terror, shaping it, and delivering it across generations. He moved to the hidden compartment in the study, the one that had contained the notebook and photographs of the blackmailer. The envelope with the photograph was gone. In its place lay a small, handheld camera, identical to the one Eliza had used. His pulse raced. The camera felt alive, as though it pulsed with anticipation. The blackmailer had left it as the final instrument of judgment. Mark's reflection in the polished wood of the desk seemed to move independently, subtle at first, then undeniably so. His eyes flickered, not in sync with his own movements, and for a moment he glimpsed a distorted version of himself, a version already claimed by the curse, smiling faintly, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and compliance. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the camera. Mark raised it, hands shaking, and pointed it at himself. Memories of Eliza flashed before him, her final moments, the meticulous terror, the inevitability of her choice. He realized that the blackmailer had never been merely a person. It was a construct, an extension of the cursed mechanism, the camera, the messages, the mansion, all working together to perpetuate the cycle. His thoughts spiraled. Could he resist? Could he escape the pattern that had destroyed her? But the mansion's shadows seemed to close in, guiding him inexorably toward the inevitable. Every reflective surface now mirrored not only his image but his fate. The merge of observer and observed, a template that had already claimed Eliza and now demanded him. Mark lowered the camera to his chest. Every instinct screamed to destroy it, to flee, to resist. But rational thought, long battered by sleep deprivation and terror, whispered a cruel inevitability. The curse would not be denied. The observer within the lens, whatever force it embodied, had learned, adapted, and anticipated every possible defiance. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Mark raised the camera once more, positioning it as Eliza had positioned hers. The mansion seemed to pulse with anticipation, the walls echoing with the faintest whispers, fragments of past victims, warnings, pleas, and silent accusations. He placed the camera on the desk and began recording, hands trembling. His voice, hoarse and ragged, filled the silence. "I understand. I see the pattern. I am part of it now." The reflection in the desk warped, contorting subtly, twisting into a mockery of his features. Mark watched, frozen, as the reflection reached out, gesturing toward the camera. It was no longer him, or perhaps it had always been, a version of himself trapped by the same cycle. The camera's red recording light glowed steadily, illuminating the fear etched into his face. The messages, the notebook, the hidden cameras, and the mansion itself had all guided him to this singular act, observation as participation. The curse demanded his compliance, and Mark, exhausted and broken, understood he could not resist. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. Shadows shifted, light flickered, and reflections multiplied, creating a dizzying labyrinth of self-images. He glimpsed Eliza again, faintly, in the corner of a mirror, her expression pleading, terrified, yet somehow resigned. She had been the first, he realized, and he was the second, and the cycle would continue. Mark's hand shook as he reviewed the recordings he had made over the past days. The videos played back subtly altered. Reflections that should not have existed, shadows moving independently, his own actions anticipated and mirrored in impossible ways. The curse had been observing him, teaching him, preparing him, and now it waited for the final act, the completion of the cycle. He rose from the desk and walked through the mansion, the camera in hand, each step guided by an invisible force. The walls seemed to breathe, the shadows lengthened, and every reflective surface offered a glimpse of himself and the inevitability of his choice. At the center of the mansion, in the main hall, he paused before a large, floor-to-ceiling mirror he had previously ignored. Its surface was flawless, reflecting not just the room, but the entirety of his experiences over the past week. The messages, the cameras, the shadows, Eliza's final moments, and his own creeping surrender. He set the camera on a nearby table, its red light blinking steadily. And then, almost instinctively, he lifted his hands and pressed them to his chest, mimicking the gestures he had seen in Eliza's footage. The reflection in the mirror reacted, moving independently, contorting into expressions of horror and anticipation. Mark's voice faltered, trembling. I see you. I understand. A profound silence fell over the mansion, as if it were holding its breath. And then, subtly, the reflection in the mirror smiled. Not Mark, not Eliza, but a presence beyond comprehension, pleased, satisfied, patient. The curse had accepted him. The camera recorded silently, capturing the final moments. Mark's own movements seemed guided by the mansion, by the unseen observer, by the inevitable flow of the 7-day ritual. The mirror reflected a version of him already claimed by the curse, a pale, haunted figure whose eyes were wide with recognition and resignation. And then, finally, Mark's vision blurred. The mansion, the shadows, the reflections all converged into a single suffocating awareness. His body went rigid, his voice caught in his throat, and for a brief moment, the world itself seemed to hold still. When the police arrived days later, summoned by a neighbor's concern, they found the mansion silent, untouched, and pristine. Mark's body was discovered in a hidden room, hanging in the same manner Eliza had been found. The camera rested on a nearby desk, recording steadily, its red light unwavering. The footage revealed the final moments of his existence, but with a twist. The reflection in every frame, including on the digital devices and polished surfaces, was not Mark. It was the presence, the entity behind the curse, smiling faintly, waiting, patient, deliberate. The mansion's secrets, the cameras, and the messages had completed the cycle, claiming another victim while ensuring the mechanism of terror remained intact. And in the shadows of the mansion, in the still air between walls and ceilings, the lens waited. The cycle was complete, yet endless. Whoever looked into the reflections next might be the next to participate, the next to become part of the cursed story. The 7-day curse had fulfilled its purpose. The custodian's echo. London at night has a rhythm of its own. Outside, the fog coils around the gas lamps, muffling footsteps and traffic, softening the city into a realm of muted shadows. But inside the old university library, silence carries differently. It hangs heavy between the shelves, between the ancient stacks, in the air thick with dust and ink, and the lingering weight of centuries. Sarah adjusted the strap of her bag and stepped into the dim foyer. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, or maybe it was just louder here, in the stillness of night. She had worked the night shift for months, but the library never felt fully empty. There was always a presence, subtle and watching, something that didn't belong to any visitor or professor. She flicked the switch for the hallway lights. The bulbs flickered once, twice, and settled into a weak, trembling glow. Shadows pooled along the edges of the room, stretching like ink across parchment. Her boots echoed on the marble floors, a sharp rhythm that seemed almost disrespectful in the quiet. The first time she heard it, it was almost imperceptible. A faint knock, like wood striking wood, from below the forbidden basement. Staff spoke of it in hushed tones. The custodian, they said. He never left. Sarah shivered. Her colleagues claimed it was superstition. A tragic accident decades ago, a gurney of bookshelves collapsing on a lone custodian. The story said his echo lingered in the stacks, in the locked storage rooms, waiting. But Sarah had heard it herself. The taps, the scratches, rhythmic and purposeful, as though the building itself remembered. Tonight, curiosity gnawed at her. She carried a flashlight and her ID card, essential for any access to restricted areas. Her heart pounded as she approached the stairs that led down to the basement. She could feel the cool draft rising, carrying a faint scent of old paper and rotting wood. The basement door was solid, painted iron gray, with a tarnished brass handle. She hesitated, listening. The tapping had begun again, slow at first, then forming a pattern like Morse code. Tisk, tisk, scratch, tisk. She paused, breath shallow, eyes scanning the darkness below. The pattern repeated. A rational part of her mind argued. It's just the building settling. Wood creaks, old pipes shift. But the other part, the part that clutched at her nerves, whispered that this was something else, something deliberate, something waiting. She swiped her ID and heard the lock click. The door swung open with a low groan. The basement air smelled heavier here, thick with dust and age. The light from her flashlight cut narrow swaths through the darkness, illuminating rows of towering shelves. Books from centuries past leaned in their slots, leather cracked, gold lettering dull. The sound came again, sharper this time. Closer. Tap. Scratch. Tap. The rhythm was undeniable. She froze. The source seemed to move along the shelves, but when her light landed, there was nothing. Only the shelves, the books, and the whispering drafts of air. Her curiosity won. She moved deeper, boots silent on the stone floor, flashlight sweeping every corner. Her hand brushed against a shelf handle. The metal was cold, almost alive under her fingertips. Then she saw it. A mobile shelf, its locks rusted and old, yet the mechanism strangely intact. It had been secured for decades, yet now it seemed almost expectant. Sarah knelt, examining the lock. Her hand shook as she lifted the rusted latch. With a groan of protest, the shelf swung open slightly, revealing rows of books behind it. But something was wrong. The books weren't merely displaced or dusty, they bore marks of violence. Pages were pierced, covers slashed, spines punctured by sharp objects that left the leather torn. Her breath caught. The implements seemed to have been wielded by a hand no longer living, a presence that remembered the custodian's fate. Her flashlight trembled as she swept across the shelf. The scratches on the floor seemed to suggest motion, deliberate and methodical, as if the shelf itself had moved, shaping an invisible message. A sudden thud made her start. Something heavy shifted behind her, the echo of wood, striking wood, the kind of noise that should not exist in an abandoned section. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she stepped back, bumping into another shelf. The tapping intensified, faster now, scratching and tapping in a deliberate sequence. Instinctively, she recognized a rhythm. Morse code? Her mind raced, fingers trembling. Tay, K. The first letters formed almost slowly, as if the building itself were speaking. S-A-R-A-H. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The tapping continued, spelling out her name. Each letter was a summons, a warning. She backed away, eyes wide, scanning the shadows that now seemed to twist and stretch toward her. The shelf she had opened creaked and moved slightly on its own, as though pushed by invisible hands. Panic set in. She turned toward the stairs, toward the door, but the basement seemed to have changed. The passageways elongated, corners darkened unnaturally. The exit was just out of reach, the door too far, too solid. The tapping followed her, faster, more insistent, each sound carrying the weight of inevitability. A low scraping made her spin. The shelf had shifted again, blocking her retreat. The books rattled, pierced covers glinting in the flashlight's beam. It wasn't merely the shelves that moved, the library itself seemed alive with the echo of the custodian's death. She stumbled backward, hands against the cool, splintered wood of another shelf. The scratches and taps intensified into a staccato rhythm, spelling something she could not yet comprehend. Her mind raced, heart hammering in her chest. This was no accident, no residual noise of a building settling. It was communication, directed, personal. The air grew colder. Her breath became visible, white clouds curling in front of her face. She realized with horror that the tapping, the scratches were forming words, not just letters. They were a message, encoded in the language of the dead, the rhythm of the custodian's final moments. Sarah's hand shook as she tried to pull the shelf aside, but it was heavier than it should have been, immovable. The taps and scratches intensified. Faster, urgent, her name again. Sarah. She screamed. A raw, desperate sound that seemed swallowed by the darkness. The light of her flashlight flickered and dimmed. The shadows deepened, stretching across the walls, across the floor, across her very body. The tapping grew deafening, a relentless drumming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then she understood. It was not the shelf alone. The custodian's echo had become the library itself, his final terror woven into every beam, every board, every shelf. The Morse code, the scratches, the taps, they were instructions, warnings, and inescapable commands. She ran, the floor slick beneath her boots, the walls closing in. Every step brought a new sequence of taps, spelling her name, spelling her fate. The door loomed ahead, yet no matter how fast she moved, the exit seemed impossibly distant, reshaped by the invisible hands of history and rage. One final glance behind her revealed the shelf tilting slightly, the books quivering, the implements embedded within them glinting like eyes. And in that instant, she understood. It was a trap, a summoning, a curse of sound and motion. The custodian's echo was not a memory. It was a force, deliberate and patient, claiming the unwary who dared to trespass into the depths of the forgotten. Sarah's pulse never slowed. The tapping continued, relentless, a rhythm she could no longer ignore. Each knock and scratch reverberated through the basement as though the library itself had taken a pulse once synced precisely to her fear. She pressed herself against the stone wall, flashlight shaking in her hand, trying to pinpoint the source. The shelves stood like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching unnaturally across the floor. Every shadow seemed deliberate, every movement measured. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, just a trick of the building. It's just wood settling. Just wood settling. But the sound contradicted her rationalizations. It wasn't random. The taps were patterned, precise. She crouched down, listening closely, her ears strained, heart hammering. Yes, it was Morse code. She had seen it in her head, her name spelled out in the previous moments. But now the sequence was longer, more complex. Tap, scratch, tap, pause, tap, scratch. Her fingers hovered over the dusty floor as if touching it would somehow answer her questions. She scrambled backward, bumping into a shelf. Books rattled in protest. The shelf tilted slightly, though she hadn't touched it. A sharp, metallic scent filled the air. Rust, old ink, and something she couldn't identify. Iron, copper, blood, perhaps? Her stomach churned, bile rising. The rhythm continued, faster now, almost urgent. Tap, scratch, tap, scratch. Each repetition spelled words she could almost make out, but not fully. Fragmented. Help. Trapped. Don't leaves. A-R-A-H. Her knees buckled. The echo wasn't just tapping. It was communicating, demanding, calling. The basement seemed to stretch impossibly. Corners disappeared into darkness, stacks rearranging themselves as her mind tried to map them. Each aisle seemed longer than the last, the ceiling lower, the shadows closer. Sarah's breaths were short, her chest tight, yet her curiosity overrode fear. She had to understand. She had to know what this force was, this echo that lingered decades after the custodian's death. Her flashlight beam settled on one particular shelf. Unlike the others, it bore signs of movement scuff marks on the floorboards, scratches along its edges. Embedded in the wood were sharp points, nails or spikes, worn and rusted, but positioned deliberately. The objects were angled as if they were fingers, reaching out. She swallowed hard. Her gaze followed the points, some pierced books, Others seemed to strike toward empty space. She crouched closer, running her fingers over the rough wood. The scratches formed patterns, letters, shapes, and as she traced them, a dreadful clarity dawned. The taps and scratches weren't random. They were instructions. The custodian's echo wasn't just haunting the basement, it was teaching. It was spelling, signaling, marking a path. Sarah backed away, feeling the cold press of stone walls against her back. She wanted to flee, but instinct anchored her. There was something here she had to see. She had to read it before it was too late. The shelves' movements grew more pronounced, the taps now deafening in the enclosed space. The Morse code had sped up, urgent, chaotic, yet deliberate. Her hand shook as she pressed her ears to the shelf. Tap, scratch, tap, pause, tap, scratch. She spelled the letters aloud, slowly at first, then faster, then. Then, she recoiled. The message was clear. Come, find me. But find whom? The custodian? Or was it her own reflection in the echo, being summoned? A sudden scraping made her spin. Another shelf had moved closer, narrowly missing her. Books tumbled to the floor, covers slashed, pages pierced by rusted points. One fell open, landing on a table. She bent down, hands trembling, flipping through the pages. Notes were written centuries-old annotations, yet interspersed with strange symbols she didn't recognize. Spirals, scratches, and lines that seemed to mirror the movements of the spikes. It was a map, a guide, a warning. She realized the custodian's echo was not just a spirit. It was the library itself, or at least an extension of the custodian's death, made manifest. The spikes, the scratches, the Morse code all encoded, communicating a history of suffering and obsession. Sarah stumbled backward, her flashlight beam catching the shadows of the shelves. They were moving again, inching closer, subtly, but undeniably. The taps and scratches intensified, spelling, trapped. No escape. Help. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She tried the door. Locked. The handle wouldn't budge. Panic surged, icy and overwhelming. The basement had become a cage. The echo, relentless, followed her movements, anticipating, orchestrating, driving her to the brink. A low moan echoed through the stacks. Not human, not mechanical, but something in between. Sarah's mind raced. Could she communicate back? Could she break the rhythm? Interrupt the pattern? Her fingers shook as she tried to tap back on the nearest shelf. Tap, scratch, tap, pause, scratch. Nothing. The echo continued, undeterred, spelling out words she couldn't fully grasp. She realized, with a growing horror, that the echo was alive in a way that surpassed death. It wasn't a haunting, it was a sentient pattern, a presence encoded in the very architecture. The custodian's body had been gone for decades, but the rhythm of his last moments, the fear, the panic, the fatal mistake, had imprinted itself into the library. And now it claimed her attention, her presence, her life. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, staring at the moving shelf. Her flashlight caught the spikes embedded in the books, shining faintly. The scratches formed letters again. Say Ray. She gasped, understanding dawning. She could not escape. Every step she took, every breath, every heartbeat had been anticipated, integrated into the echo's rhythm. The custodian's death was not merely a story. It was a blueprint, and she was following it, unwillingly, inexorably. A sudden movement made her spin. The shadow detached itself from the shelves, a form thin, impossibly tall, distorted. The echo's pattern coalesced into something resembling a figure. Its head cocked, listening, observing. Its hands were elongated shadows, reaching, not touching but directing. Sarah's stomach nodded. Her flashlight flickered. The tapping reached a fevered pace, the scratches punctuated by a metallic rasp that resonated through her bones. Her name again. Sarah. The echo was calling, claiming, instructing. She tried to run. The shelves shifted again, forming corridors that led nowhere. Every path ended in walls of books, spikes gleaming in the dim light, the Morse code continuing, a relentless drum. COMEFEND. The air grew colder. Her breath formed clouds that drifted upward, twisting into the shadows. The echo surrounded her, embodied in the wood, the books, the very floor. And then she heard it, not a knock or a scratch, but a whisper, almost imperceptible. Sarah. Her legs buckled. The whisper was everywhere and nowhere. The spikes, the shelves, the patterns all seemed to respond to her fear, to her hesitation. She stumbled, pressed against a shelf, hands grazing the spikes, and felt something pierce her glove, a sharp sting, like the echo itself had reached through matter to touch her. Panic consumed her. She realized the truth, a horrifying certainty. The custodian's echo was teaching her, testing her, preparing her for the final act. The rhythm was a code, a map, a summoning. The shelves, the spikes, the taps, they were orchestrated, guiding her. And then, in a sudden horrifying clarity, she understood the first letter of the final sequence. S, her name. The echo had begun its final communication. She fell to her knees, chest heaving, eyes darting across the basement. Every shadow, every shelf, every reflection of herself in the polished wood seemed alive, watching, waiting. The library had become a predator, patient and deliberate, and she was at the center of its rhythm. The tapping continued, spelling letters, spelling words, spelling destiny. Sarah's mind spun. The echo was not just sound, it was intent, intelligence, memory, vengeance, and it had claimed her. The basement seemed to breathe around Sarah, a slow, deliberate inhalation and exhalation that made the stone walls pulse. The tapping continued, urgent now, weaving a rhythm that was impossible to ignore. Every echo seemed to carry intent. Every scratch resonated with history. She pressed herself against the far wall, heart hammering, eyes darting to the locked archive at the center of the basement, the infamous storage unit that had been sealed for decades. It was taller than any shelf she had ever seen, constructed of iron and dark polished oak, its surface worn by countless hands that had never fully touched it. Its lock glinted under the beam of her flashlight, old brass dulled by age, yet somehow menacing. Something about it drew her, magnetic and terrifying, promising answers and threatening consequences in equal measure. She swallowed, trying to steady her trembling hands. Each tap of the Morse code seemed closer now, echoing off the walls and the high ceiling. Sarah. It repeated, beckoning. The echo was no longer just communication, it was a summons. I have to know, she whispered to herself, the words swallowed by the darkness. She reached for the lock. Her fingers brushed the cold metal, and a shiver ran down her spine. The tapping intensified, faster, sharper, almost impatient. The scratches along the floor shifted slightly, rearranging themselves as if guiding her hands, her movements, her attention. The lock resisted her initial attempts. Rust and years of disuse made it stubborn, but after a few tense moments, it clicked open. The door swung with a reluctant groan, revealing the archive's interior. The air inside was colder, heavier, smelling faintly of old paper, iron, and something else. Something faintly metallic, almost like blood. Rows of shelves rose within, stacked with books older than any she had seen, some wrapped in leather, others bound in cloth. Many had been punctured, slashed, the pages bent as if pierced by invisible spikes. The arrangement was deliberate, meticulous, a pattern, a code hidden within the chaos. Sarah's flashlight swept over the titles, most of them illegible due to age, wear, and the strange markings. Then she saw it. A single shelf tilted forward slightly, an oddity in the otherwise rigid rows. Her heartbeat skipped. It was as if the shelf itself were alive, breathing, waiting. She approached, hands shaking, shining her light along its surface. Embedded in the wood were sharp, rusted spikes. The books behind them had been impaled, but not indiscriminately, each one angled precisely, forming subtle arcs and lines. Sarah realized with a shiver that the arrangement mirrored the rhythm of the tapping. She crouched, tracing the pattern with her fingers, careful not to touch the spikes. The scratches and the taps had led her here, directing her attention, forcing her to see. The custodian's echo had left instructions, encoded in wood, metal, and sound. A sudden groan echoed through the basement. Sarah froze. The shelves behind her seemed to shudder, shadows lengthening, twisting. The tapping accelerated, frantic and insistent. She could make out letters again, a sequence forming beneath the chaos. F-I-N-D-T-H-E-M. The message was incomplete, fragmented, but the meaning was clear. The echo wanted her to discover something within the archive, something hidden, preserved, secret. Her pulse raced. She scanned the shelves, searching for anomalies. Then her light caught a small, iron-bound box tucked into the corner, almost invisible against the dark wood. She reached for it, and the taps fell silent. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the noise it pressed against her ears, an oppressive weight of anticipation. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the box, and a faint click suggested it had been locked internally. She set it on a nearby table, brushing off centuries of dust, her mind racing with questions and fear. The box opened easily, revealing its contents: a series of old notes, brittle with age, and a small wooden implement, twisted and splintered. Her stomach churned. The notes were in a neat, flowing script, though some letters were obscured by time and wear. They detailed the custodian's last days, his fears, his obsession with the archive, and the events leading to his death. As she read, a cold realization settled over her. The custodian had not died by accident. He had been trapped by the very shelves he tended, crushed under the weight of books, but not before encoding his final moments into the wood, spikes and scratches creating a mechanism to preserve his presence, his vengeance, his warning. A sudden scrape behind her made her spin. One of the shelves had moved closer again, nearly brushing her shoulder. The spikes glinted in her flashlight like fingers reaching, warning, demanding. She backed away slowly, keeping her eyes on the tilted shelf. The Morse code resumed, faster now. SARACA9TESCAT dot. Her knees buckled. It wasn't a warning anymore, it was a declaration. She could not leave. The echo would not allow it. The custodian's death had created a cycle, a trap, and she had stepped into it. Every step she had taken, every glance, every movement had been anticipated, guiding her inexorably toward the final act. The wooden implement in the box seemed to hum with latent energy. Its twisted form mirrored the spikes embedded in the shelves. Compelled by a mix of dread and necessity, Sarah picked it up. As she did, the shelves shifted slightly, revealing another anomaly. A small, hidden cavity behind the back of one row. Inside was a single book, bound in dark leather, pages blank but for a single inscription in crimson ink. Follow the rhythm, answer the echo, become part of the story. And her blood ran cold. The echo was not just the past. It was a presence that demanded participation, a ritual encoded into every inch of the basement. The custodian's death had not ended with him. It had persisted, waiting for the next observer, the next intruder, the next Sarah. The tapping now surrounded her, reverberating through the walls, through the floor, through the very air. It spelled her name again, insistently. SARAH. She realized she was standing in the center of a living pattern, one that connected every spike, every scratch, every tap into a cohesive, malevolent design. Her hands shook, gripping the wooden implement as she tried to decipher the final sequence of Morse code. Tap, scratch, tap, scratch, pause, tap, scratch. Her mind raced, trying to follow the rhythm, to answer, to comply. The custodian's echo was no longer external. It had become internal, syncing with her heartbeat, with her breath, with the frantic pounding of her pulse. The shelves groaned, moving with a slow, deliberate intelligence. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, converging toward her, and then she understood. The spikes, the books, the tapping, all were part of a mechanism, a ritual of claim. The custodian's presence had encoded itself into the library, and now, in the 7th hour of her exploration, the echo was ready to complete its cycle. A whisper, cold and urgent, seemed to emanate from the very wood. Sarah. Answer. Become. Her legs gave out. The room tilted, or perhaps it was her perception warped by exhaustion and fear. The books rattled, the spikes gleamed, and the echo, the rhythm of the fallen, enveloped her. The locked archive had revealed its secret, and she realized with horror that she was not merely observing anymore. She was part of it. Sarah's breath came in jagged bursts, fogging the dim beam of her flashlight. The locked archive loomed behind her, the wooden spikes protruding like skeletal fingers, the old leather-bound books arranged as if they were waiting for her. She clutched the twisted wooden implement tighter, feeling the weight of decades of fear and obsession embedded in its fibers. The tapping had grown into a frenzy. It echoed from every surface, the floor, the walls, the shelves themselves. Tap, scratch, tap, pause, scratch. The sequence no longer spelled her name alone. Now it formed a message too fragmented to fully comprehend, but the urgency was clear. She was being called, commanded, drawn into a ritual she could not ignore. She took a hesitant step forward, feeling the cold stone floor press against her boots. The shelves around her shuddered slightly, moving with a rhythm that mimicked her own heartbeat. The space seemed to contract, the ceiling lowering imperceptibly, shadows pooling thickly at her feet and creeping along the walls. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, yet she felt unable to move, as if the rhythm itself had tethered her in place. Then she saw it. Another shelf, previously obscured in darkness, had shifted. Its movement was deliberate, exposing a small cavity carved into the wood at waist height. Inside lay an old notebook, bound in cracked black leather. The pages were yellowed with age, brittle, yet they seemed to hum with an energy she could feel against her fingertips. She knelt, hands trembling, and opened it. Inside were meticulous entries, notes on the library's construction, the custodian's daily routines, and most chillingly diagrams of the basement shelves and spikes. Each mark, each line, each angle corresponded with the scratches she had seen and the rhythm she had heard. The custodian's death had not been the end. It had been the blueprint for a living, breathing trap. Her flashlight flickered. The shadows deepened. The tapping intensified, becoming almost deafening, the Morse code accelerating beyond the speed her mind could parse. Yet she tried, forcing herself to follow the rhythm, tapping along lightly with her fingers against the shelf. Tap, scratch, tap, pause, scratch. Slowly, the letters began to form coherent words. Follow. The rhythm. Answer. The echo. A chill ran down her spine. The echo was alive. It was conscious, aware of her presence, feeding off her fear, guiding her actions. Every movement she made was mirrored, anticipated, manipulated by the custodian's long-dead will. The wooden implement in her hand seemed to vibrate subtly, resonating with the rhythm around her. She realized, with dawning horror, that it was not just a tool, it was part of the mechanism. Its splintered edges matched the spikes embedded in the shelves. Its twisted form mirrored the angles in the diagrams. She was holding a key, a conduit, a participant in a ritual that had been set in motion decades ago. The taps and scratches grew faster, forming a relentless drum in her ears. She backed away slowly, eyes scanning the shelves. One shelf, the tallest in the archive, creaked forward slightly, revealing a narrow passage behind it. It was dark, impossibly narrow, lined with spikes and sharp edges, yet the rhythm seemed to beckon her toward it. The Morse code spelled her name again, each letter a summons. S-A-R-A-H. S-A-R-A-H. Her rational mind fought back. This is impossible. It's just a building. Just old wood and shadows. But the instinct in her bones screamed otherwise. She had been drawn here, guided here, and now she was part of something she could neither understand nor escape. She stepped into the passage. The shelves closed in behind her, forming a corridor too tight for comfort. The taps and scratches continued, now vibrating through the wood beneath her hands, into her palms, her arms, her chest. She could feel the echo in her bones, in her blood, in the rhythm of her heartbeat. The custodian was no longer confined to memory. He was the floor, the shelves, the spikes alive in every fiber of the building. The corridor ended abruptly at a locked door, smaller than the archive's main entrance, but constructed with the same dark oak and iron fittings. A small brass plate bore an inscription more nearly illegible. The final revelation. She pressed her palm against the door. It was warm, unnaturally warm, and a low vibration ran through her hand, the Morse code around her paused for a heartbeat. Then it began again, slower now, deliberate. Open and see the truth. She hesitated. Every rational thought screamed against it. The custodian had died here. The echo had claimed victims. Yet something compelled her. She raised the wooden implement and slid it into the old lock. The mechanism groaned, resisting, but then clicked. The door swung inward with a reluctant creak. Inside was a small chamber, barely illuminated by the light of her flashlight. The walls were lined with old books, but the centerpiece was a pedestal. On it lay a single object, a metallic rod, twisted and warped, rusted yet unmistakably human in its proportions. It was the tool the custodian had used, the implement of his labor and his demise. His stomach knotted. This was the object that had imprinted the echo into the library itself, a focus for the haunting, the rhythm, the curse. The taps and scratches intensified, forming an overwhelming crescendo. Sarah realized with terror that the echo was reacting to her presence in the chamber, the rhythm now synchronized with her own pulse. She felt the library watching her, live in a way that defied comprehension. Every spike, every shelf, every shadow was aware of her, guiding her, compelling her. Her hand shook as she lifted the rod. A jolt of energy passed through her, sharp and electric. She gasped, seeing flashes of the past. The custodian crushed beneath falling shelves, his hands reaching for something, anything, before the final moment. The echo of his death imprinted in the wood, in the metal, in the very air around her. She understood. This was the custodian's message. He had encoded himself into the library, using his death as the template, the rhythm as the language. The Morse code now spelled a final sequence, faster than she could process. Participate or perish. Her mind spun. She realized that every step she had taken, every interaction with the shelves and spikes, had been a prelude, a test, a compulsion. The echo was not passive. It was alive, conscious, demanding engagement. And now it had reached its climax. A shadow detached itself from the back wall of the chamber. It was tall, elongated, distorted the form of the custodian, yet more than human, more than corporeal. Its head tilted, listening, observing, the rhythm of the basement pulsing around it. The taps, scratches, and metallic groans had coalesced into a single unified presence. Sarah's hands trembled, gripping the rod. The echoes wrapped around her, pulling, shaping, instructing. She realized with a dreadful clarity, she was no longer merely an observer. The rhythm demanded her action. Participation was not optional. The custodian's form reached toward her, fingers elongated, not touching but guiding, orchestrating. The Morse code spelled out the final directive. Sarah, join. They echo. Her vision blurred. The walls seemed to pulse, the shelves swaying imperceptibly, the spikes gleaming in response to her every heartbeat. The echo had become a living force, a sentient presence that demanded compliance. And in that moment, Sarah understood. She could resist, and she would perish. She could obey, and become part of the rhythm, part of the custodian's eternal echo. Her breath caught. Her body trembled. And then, as if drawn by invisible strings, she stepped forward. The chamber, the shelves, the echoes all converged upon her, and the final sequence began. The chamber seemed to close in around Sarah, walls contracting imperceptibly, shadows deepening to ink-black forms that crept along the shelves. The rhythm of tapping, scratching, and metallic groans had become unbearable, vibrating through the floor, the walls, even her own bones. Her heartbeat raced in perfect sync with the Morse code that surrounded her. The message repeated endlessly. Sarah, join the echo. Sarah, join the echo. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but the library had long since stripped her of choice. The custodian's echo pulsed like a living organism, and she was at its center, the final note of a symphony that had begun decades ago. The wooden rod she gripped vibrated violently in her hands, as though resonating with the building itself, guiding her movements toward the inevitable. She turned slowly, facing the shadows that now moved with intention. The shelves creaked and leaned, aligning in patterns she had never noticed before, forming a labyrinth of spikes and jagged wood. They were not just obstacles, they were extensions of the echo, deliberate and purposeful. The metallic points gleamed like teeth in the faint flashlight beam, some piercing the books, some slicing through empty air, all directed toward her. Her hands trembled, sweat slicking her palms. She tried to speak, but the air seemed thick, resistant, as though even sound was being absorbed into the living rhythm of the basement. The tapping accelerated, now almost deafening, and the scratches along the floor and shelves spelled out her name continuously. Sarah. 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 She realized with a chilling clarity. The echo had not been passive until now. It had been waiting, shaping her steps, guiding her, compelling her to follow a ritual she could barely comprehend. And now, at the final hour, it demanded full engagement. A shelf shifted closer, scraping against the floor with a metallic rasp. Sarah's flashlight caught glimpses of the spikes embedded within it, angled in such a way that they seemed to reach for her, to channel the energy of the echo into her very being. She tried to step back, but the corridor of moving shelves seemed endless, looping, redirecting her, each step guided by the invisible hands of the custodian. The Morse code pulsed through her mind now, faster than she could consciously parse. The taps had become a heartbeat of the building itself, the scratches a language of pain and obsession. Every part of the basement was alive, responsive, aware. She understood the final message. Participation was not optional. The custodian's echo had survived, through encoded patterns, through rhythm, through every sharp edge of wood and metal, and it required a vessel. Her hand shook violently as she raised the rod. The spikes along the shelves vibrated in response, humming, resonating, aligning. The chamber seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, the air thick with metallic scent, old ink, and something she dared not identify. Her breath came in short gasps, as the shadows coalesced into a dark, towering form. The custodian, not human, not entirely spectral, but alive through the echo he had imprinted upon the library. The figure's elongated limbs reached out, fingers never touching but guiding, orchestrating. The tapping and scratching intensified, spelling one final sequence. Answer the rhythm, or become it. Sarah's mind reeled. The choice was clear. Resistance meant destruction. Obedience meant transformation. Every fiber of her being screamed, yet a compulsion stronger than fear drew her forward. She stepped into the center of the chamber, rod in hand, the shelves shifting in a perfect circle around her. The Morse code, now synchronized fully with her pulse. Sarah, Sarah, join, join, the echo, echo. Each tap and scratch struck her with a force that was not entirely physical. Her vision swam, and flashes of the custodian's final moments assaulted her senses. The shelves collapsing, the spikes piercing flesh, the panic, the inevitability of death. And within those moments, she saw a pathway, a blueprint of the echo, a rhythm she had to follow to survive, to merge with the pulse without being destroyed. She followed instinct, mimicking the rhythm with precise taps of the rod against the floor. Tap, scratch, tap, pause, scratch. The library responded, shelves aligning perfectly, spikes humming, shadows bending toward her. It was a dialogue, a ritual, a dance with a presence older than herself. She realized that by participating, she could become part of the echo, survive within it, rather than be crushed by it. Time lost meaning. Minutes, hours, maybe days, merged into the rhythm. Her heartbeat, the tapping, the scratching, the vibrations of the rod all merged into a singular pulse. She felt herself dissolving into it, no longer just Sarah, but a component of the echo, an extension of the custodian's legacy. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the rhythm slowed. The tapping became deliberate, slower, purposeful. The scratches faded, leaving a silence that pressed against her ears. The shelves stilled, spikes retracted, shadows settling into inert shapes. The chamber exhaled. Sarah stumbled, chest heaving, her hands slick with sweat, the rod clutched tightly. The custodian's form lingered for a heartbeat, a shadowed silhouette, observing, approving, then dissolving into the dark corners of the basement. The echo was no longer aggressive. It had accepted her, integrated her, and in that acceptance, she felt an unsettling calm. Yet the calm was not peace. It was vigilance, awareness. She understood that the rhythm still existed, that it would awaken again for the next intruder, the next observer, the next victim, and she was now part of it, a node in the library's eternal network of echoes, a living memory of fear and compulsion. Her flashlight flickered. She looked around the chamber, now silent, still, yet alive with memory. The spikes, shelves, and scratches retained their positions, frozen in anticipation. Sarah's reflection in the darkened glass of a nearby display seemed distorted, elongated, a hybrid of herself and the echo she had joined. She shivered, realizing the final truth. The library did not merely haunt, it claimed. It integrated, it persisted. And she, Sarah, was now both observer and instrument, a custodian in the echo of the past, a part of the rhythm that would never end. The basement door above remained locked, the outside world distant, inaccessible. Yet it no longer terrified her. Fear had transformed into comprehension. She was both the rhythm and the listener, the tap and the pause, the echo and the witness. The custodian's message had been fulfilled, and she had answered. The tapping resumed, faint now, almost imperceptible, as if acknowledging her presence. S-A-R-A. The echo had recognized its new participant. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, rod in hand, pulse aligned with the rhythm of the fallen. The custodian's echo, once a voice of terror, had become her reality. She was no longer alone, yet entirely isolated, part of something eternal, unseen by the world above, yet indelibly present in the dark heartbeat of the library. The shelves shifted slightly, the spikes gleamed, and the rhythm continued. Sarah did not resist. She had become part of the final echo, and in that still, suffocating silence, the basement waited for the next visitor, the final confession. The mountain air was sharp, cold, and scented faintly of pine and decay. Alex led the group up the winding trail toward the abandoned sanatorium, the crumbling structure barely visible through the fog that clung stubbornly to the slopes. Windows gaped like empty eyes, and the faded red brick was streaked with years of rain and moss. They had all heard the rumors, tales of patients left in the dark, of screams that lingered long after the hospital fell silent. Alex, however, was driven by something more: curiosity, the thrill of exploring a place where fear had once been manufactured. The front doors groaned under the weight of rusted hinges as they pushed inside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of early morning light that sliced through broken windows. The air smelled of mildew, metal, and something sweeter, coppery, faintly metallic, like blood long dried but never forgotten. Alex shone his flashlight down the long, narrow corridor. Old signs swung lazily on rusted chains. Psychiatric ward, observation rooms, isolation cells. Each step echoed, hollow and unnerving. His friends followed, hesitating at every broken doorway, their whispered conversations swallowed by the cavernous silence. Then they found it, room 12B. The door was ajar, revealing the faint outline of a cot and a chair pushed against a wall. On the chair rested a reel-to-reel tape recorder, coated in dust and age, its reels frozen in place. A note was pinned beneath it, yellowed and brittle, written in the precise clinical handwriting of Dr. Reed. To understand the limits of fear, one must listen without resistance. Alex felt a thrill, a tremor of dread beneath it. The tape recorder seemed impossibly out of place, a relic that refused to die, waiting for someone to turn it on. He pressed play. The tape hissed, static filling the room. Then a voice emerged, calm, measured, clinical. "This is Dr. Reed. If you are hearing this, you have entered the space where observation ends and participation begins." The friends exchanged uneasy glances, but Alex felt drawn closer, ears straining. The voice continued, detailing methods of psychological manipulation, describing patients pushed to their limits, observing how isolation and whispered suggestions could drive them to unimaginable acts, even self-destruction. Alex felt the hairs on his neck rise as the voice shifted, almost imperceptibly targeting him. "Alex, do you remember the night you lied to your friends? The secret you thought no one knew?" He froze. The words were specific, intimate, and they pierced him in a way that made him suddenly vulnerable. His pulse quickened. The voice continued, now layering over itself, warping, bending toward tones he recognized from himself, echoing his own inner monologue. "You always thought you were in control, Alex. But control is an illusion. Fear is the only truth. Admit it. Admit what you did." His friends looked at him with concern, unaware of the thoughts stirring in his mind. The tape, meant to be passive, now felt active, intimate, invasive. Each statement resonated with his memories, his doubts, his guilt, as if Dr. Reed or the tape itself could see every corner of his mind. The room seemed to shrink, the walls bending, the shadows lengthening unnaturally. Alex's breathing grew shallow. He could feel paranoia creeping into his veins. What if the others had seen it too? What if one of them... He shook his head violently, trying to dispel the thought. Yet the tape whispered, always precise, feeding his insecurities. "Alex, did you take it too far? Could you have..." The voice trailed off, replaced by his own intonation, eerily accurate. "Did I?" Alex whispered, barely audible. The friends noticed the change in him, but before they could speak, the tape continued, layering voices over one another. Dr. Reed, Alex, even tones neither should have produced. The reel spun faster, the static rising, drowning the room in an almost tangible presence. Suddenly, the tape described an event, an altercation that never happened. One of his friends, lying on the floor, injured. Alex's stomach churned. The suggestion was vivid, the details precise, and he could see it in his mind as if it had occurred. A cold panic took hold, twisting his thoughts into knots. He looked at his friends, fear reflected in their eyes, and for a fleeting second, he believed the lie. It is not enough to witness fear. One must commit it. One must experience the act to understand fully. The tape murmured, and Alex felt the words sink into his mind like ice. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, the sound echoing through the empty ward. The other voices, his friends, tried to reassure him. "Alex, it's just a tape. We're here. It's not real." But reality had shifted. The tape was no longer just a recording, it was a living presence, a manipulator. It echoed in his mind, warping memory and perception, planting doubts and horrors that had never occurred. Alex could feel the whispers crawling through his skull, embedding themselves, guiding him. Every glance at his friends seemed suspicious. Every movement, every breath felt loaded with hidden menace. He began to believe he was responsible for some terrible act, an accident, or worse, orchestrated by his own hands. The tape's voice, now entirely his own, spoke directly. "Confess, Alex. Tell me what you did. Admit it. Only then can you find release." His legs gave way beneath him. The sanatorium seemed to tilt, walls groaning, doors rattling. He sank to the floor, hands clutching his head, whispering apologies to people who had never been harmed. The tape played on. "Doctor?" Reed's tone merging with Alex's, creating a dialogue that only he could hear. Hours or minutes passed. Time lost all meaning. The tape had become a mirror, reflecting his own guilt and paranoia, blending memory with suggestion. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind through broken windows, became part of the narrative. The sanatorium was alive with the echo of manipulation, a predator feeding on doubt and fear. By the time the friends pulled him away from the tape, they found him trembling, incoherent, murmuring confessions to crimes he had never committed. The tape had stopped. The reel lay still, yet the air was thick, vibrating with residual tension. Alex's hand shook as he clutched his own hair, eyes wide with terror. He whispered fragments of confessions, unable to distinguish reality from the manipulation that had consumed him. The tape had vanished. No trace of it remained. No hint of the reel or the recorder, but its effects lingered. In that moment, Alex was alone, trapped in the consequences of a mind that had been meticulously manipulated, haunted by a voice that was both external and internal. Doctor, Reed and himself, one and the same. The sanatorium was silent again, yet the shadow of manipulation persisted, a spectral reminder that fear could be engineered and guilt implanted, leaving a seed of madness that could never be fully removed. As the sun rose over the mountains, the abandoned hospital appeared, just as it had always been, empty, decrepit, and silent. But inside, Alex's mind carried the echo of the final confession, a private torment that no one else could witness. A voice that was at once his own and another's had forced him into a nightmare from which he could never awaken, leaving him to wander the halls of his own fractured conscience. The following morning, Alex couldn't remember how they'd left the sanatorium. The memory was fragmented, like a dream slipping between his fingers. One moment, the sound of the tape still burned through his skull. The next, they were outside in the fog, someone shouting his name. He woke up on the couch of their rented cabin, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't his. The others were sitting around the table, speaking in low voices. When they noticed he was awake, the conversation stopped. "Hey," said Mia gently. "You passed out. We got you out of there." Alex tried to smile, but his face felt numb. "Where's the tape?" They looked at each other. It was Jonah who finally said, "It's gone, man. You dropped it, I think. We couldn't find it when we went back." "And from?" Alex shook his head slowly. "No, it wasn't gone. It spoke to me." "Yeah," Jonah said, forcing a chuckle. "It was just a recording, Alex. That place messes with your head." But deep down, Alex knew it wasn't the building. It was the voice. It had been too specific, too intimate. He looked toward the window. The forest outside was gray and still. A low wind moaned against the glass. For a moment, in the faint reflection, he thought he saw someone standing behind him, just a blur of white in the glass. But when he turned, there was nothing. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like something alive, whispering faintly through the cracks. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that voice again. "Confess, Alex. Tell them. Tell me." He got up and went outside. The cold air slapped him awake. The sanatorium loomed far below the ridge, its shape a dark scar against the landscape. The fog rolled thick around its roof, curling like smoke. Something was pulling him back. Inside the cabin, a faint click echoed from the kitchen. He turned sharply. The tape recorder was sitting on the counter. Alex's breath caught in his throat. Jonah's voice echoed from the bedroom. "Alex? You up?" But Alex couldn't answer. His gaze was locked on the machine. It was clean now, the dust gone, the metal gleaming as if it had just been polished. The reels spun lazily. No one had touched it. Then the tape began to play. A hiss, a crackle, and then that voice. Calm, methodical. "This is Dr. Reed. The subject has returned to the environment of exposure." The response indicates incomplete confession. Alex stumbled backward. The tape continued, his own voice layered beneath it. "I didn't mean to, I didn't hurt anyone." He froze. That wasn't a memory. That was him now. Mia came into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Alex, what are you doing?" He pointed. "Listen. Listen to it." But when she looked, the reels had stopped. The machine was silent. "Alex, there's nothing," she said softly. "You need to sleep." He stared at her, confusion and terror warring behind his eyes. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words. The tape recorder sat there, innocent and still. When he finally went back to bed, he dreamed of a room with mirrored walls and no doors. Every surface reflected his face, hundreds of them, all whispering the same word in unison: confess. By the third day, the atmosphere in the cabin had curdled into something sour. They barely spoke. Every creak made them flinch. The forest, once beautiful, now felt like a prison. Jonah tried to lighten the mood, suggesting they go into town for supplies. But Alex refused to leave. "There's something we missed," he said. "Down there, in the sanatorium." "Alex," Mia said carefully, "we agreed we're not going back. You had a breakdown. We almost had to carry you out." But Alex wasn't listening. He pulled out an old floor plan of the hospital he'd found online, tracing his finger to the sub-level below the patient ward. "There's a file room. It wasn't on any official record. Dr. Reed had to keep something there. Notes, recordings." Jonah slammed his hands on the table. "We're not ghost hunters, man. We almost lost you once. That tape messed with you." Alex looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's exactly why I have to go back. It's not finished." That night, the others found him gone. The sanatorium was worse in the dark. The halls felt longer, narrower, and the air hung thick with cold moisture. Every sound dripping water, rustling wind echoed endlessly, distorting into faint human tones. Alex carried only a flashlight and a small knife, more for comfort than defense. He descended the main stairwell into the lower levels, the beam trembling over cracked tiles and graffiti-scrawled walls. Room numbers passed like tombstones. 10B, 11B, 12B. The room where it all began. He hesitated before entering. The air inside was colder, heavier, as though the walls themselves exhaled grief. The chair and cot were gone. The room was empty except for the tape recorder waiting. He should have turned around. He didn't. He pressed play. The hiss filled the room, followed by that voice. Observation continues. The subject exhibits recurrent exposure behavior. Confession remains incomplete. Alex whispered, "What do you want from me?" The voice answered, "Truth." He shook his head. "I've told you. I didn't do anything. You lie even to yourself." The light flickered. The air thickened. From the speaker came a soft, wet sound, breathing. Not static. Breathing. Then, beneath it, the faint sound of footsteps. Approaching. Alex turned his flashlight toward the doorway. Nothing, but the breathing grew louder, now clearly not from the tape. He spun back, shining the light onto the recorder only to find it gone. A whisper brushed against his ear. "You recorded it yourself, Alex. You always were the observer." He stumbled backward, the flashlight trembling wildly. His reflection shimmered faintly on the metal cabinet in the corner. In that warped image, he saw himself, but his mouth wasn't moving. The reflection smiled, then spoke. "You killed her." Alex screamed and smashed the flashlight against the cabinet. The beam cut out, plunging the room into total blackness. They found him the next morning outside the sanatorium, sitting in the dirt, staring at nothing. His lips were blue from the cold. When Jonah touched his shoulder, he flinched violently. "What happened?" Mia asked. He looked at them, eyes hollow. "He showed me." "Who?" "Dr. Reed," Alex said. "He was in the room." Jonah exchanged a look with Mia. "That's impossible, Alex. He's been dead for decades." Alex smiled faintly, a twisted, haunted grin. "No, he's not. He's in the recordings. He's waiting for someone to finish his work." He stood brushing the dirt from his clothes. "He chose me." That evening, as they packed to leave the mountains, Jonah went to load their bags into the car. When he opened the trunk, his breath caught. Inside was the tape recorder. He called for Alex. Alex came slowly, calmly. "It followed us," he said softly, almost tenderly. "It doesn't belong there anymore." Jonah reached for it, but Alex's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with unnatural strength. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't touch it. It doesn't like being touched." "Ma'am." Mia stepped forward, voice shaking. "Alex, what's happening to you?" He turned to her with eyes that were no longer entirely his. "Nothing's happening to me. I'm happening to it." He walked back toward the cabin, carrying the tape recorder like something sacred. That night, while the others argued in panic, Alex sat alone on the porch, the tape playing softly. From inside, they could hear two voices, his and another, speaking in calm, measured tones. The manipulation only works if the subject resists. Not resisting anymore, the conversation blurred into indistinct murmurs, then laughter. When Mia stepped outside an hour later, Alex was gone. Only the tape remained, spinning in the cold. From its speaker, faintly, she heard her own voice. "Mia, do you remember what you did?" The silence after the second night felt heavy, like the sanatorium itself was holding its breath. The group had stopped joking around. No more nervous laughter. No more pretending they weren't terrified. Alex hadn't told them what he heard on the tape after midnight. How Dr. Reed's voice had changed. How it had begun whispering things only he could know. Secrets no one else could have possibly heard. He told himself it was stress, that the sound of his own fear was echoing back at him. But when he pressed play again the next morning, the whisper was gone, replaced by the faint sound of his own breathing. Not from now. From then. From when he'd first found the recorder. He shut it off and didn't tell anyone. They explored the West Wing that afternoon. Rusted bed frames, patient files glued to the floor by decades of moisture. Eliza was the first to break the silence. "You notice how it's always colder in here?" Derek shrugged. Old concrete, bad insulation, but Alex knew better. He could feel the temperature shift in waves, rhythmic, pulsing, as if the air itself were breathing with them. He touched the wall. The concrete was trembling, faintly, like a heartbeat under the skin of the building. And then, the whisper again, not from the recorder this time, but from inside the wall. "Do you remember what you did, Alex?" I spun around. No one else reacted. They were already walking ahead. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. He sat alone in the central hall, flashlight flickering over flaked paint and dead vines. He played the tape again. "Fear," Dr. Reed said, "is not an emotion. It's a form of obedience. When guilt takes shape, the subject seeks punishment. They become their own warden." There was a pause, a rustling sound. Then, "Confess, and I'll free you." Alex whispered, "What do you want me to confess?" The tape clicked softly. "You already know." He froze. "It wasn't an accident," the voice continued. "You wanted him to fall. You stood there and did nothing. Do you remember the sound?" Alex's throat tightened. His pulse raced. There was no way Reed could know about that. The scaffolding, the fall, the friend he'd never told anyone about. He stopped the tape, but the voice didn't stop. It was speaking behind him now. "Say it out loud, Alex." He turned. Nothing. Only the faint echo of the recorder, still rolling on its own. By morning, the others were terrified of him. He was pale, muttering under his breath, checking the corners of every room. "You're losing it," Derek said, half joking, half afraid. "You need to stop listening to that thing." Alex stared at him. "You don't understand. It's not just a recording. It's feeding." "Feeding on what?" "Us." They laughed nervously. But later that day, when they reviewed footage from their cameras, one of the audio tracks played a faint background whisper none of them had noticed before. It repeated the same word, over and over. Guilt, guilt, guilt. The spiral began on the fourth day. Literally. A spiral, drawn on the wall of the east wing in some dark substance that wasn't paint. At the center of it, an embedded microphone. Alex recognized it immediately. The same type used in the recorder. He leaned in. For a moment, he swore he could hear breathing. Then, a whisper so close it vibrated in his teeth. "The more you listen, the more you become." He stepped back, trembling. The air felt heavier now, pressing in from every direction. Derek tried to pull him away, but Alex snapped. "You don't hear it because it doesn't need you. It's using me." "Using you for what?" "To continue." That night, Derek disappeared. They found his camera the next morning. The lens was cracked, the strap torn. The last recording showed Derek walking alone toward the main hall, muttering that he heard something calling him. Then a scream, then static. At the very end of the tape, a voice whispered into the mic, "Confession accepted." Alex dropped the camera. He felt sick. His mind reeled with the thought that Reed, or whatever was left of him, wasn't just whispering anymore. He was choosing. By day 6, only Alex and Eliza were left. The sanatorium seemed smaller now, like the walls were folding inward. Every corridor led back to the same room, the observation chamber, the same chair, the same microphone. The recorder sat waiting on the table. Eliza turned to him, voice shaking. "We should go. We have to go." Alex looked at the door. It was open, but beyond it nothing. No forest, no light, just a black corridor that felt alive. He said quietly, "We can't." Why not?" "Because it's still recording." Eliza backed away from him. "You sound like him. Don't you get it?" That's what he wanted, to make someone keep the study alive. He walked toward the recorder. That's what the spiral means. It never stops. Each confession feeds the next. "Alex, please." He pressed play, and from the tape came his own voice. Trembling, desperate. "I killed him. It wasn't an accident." Then Reed's voice. Calm, approving. "Confession complete." Elitha screamed. The lights flickered. The air filled with whispers. Alex clutched his head, trying to drown them out. But there was no sound anymore, just his heartbeat syncing with the static, pulsing in rhythm with the building. One last whisper crawled through the dark. "Now you're ready to listen." And everything went black. The first time I saw the mirror breathe, I told myself it was exhaustion. The flicker of light across its surface, a ripple, subtle and wrong, could be explained by fatigue, by the fluorescent buzz of the studio lights. But when the reflection exhaled, fogging the glass from the inside, I realized it wasn't my eyes that were tired. It was the mirror that was alive. That night, I stayed long after everyone had left. The recording booth drowned in that particular kind of silence that only exists when you've been speaking for too long. My voice still vibrated faintly in the air, trapped between the padded walls and the microphone's silver cage. I turned toward the mirror, that old two-way panel separating me from the control room, and saw her again, the woman in the reflection. She looked like me. Same eyes, same mouth. But her movements lagged a half-second delay, just enough to make it wrong. And when I leaned closer, so did she, though her expression twisted as if she were trying to warn me. Then her lips moved. Not in sync with mine, not mimicking, speaking. I couldn't hear the words, but I felt them vibrate in my chest like a second heartbeat. and for a moment, the hum of the studio equipment harmonized with it, a low, throbbing undertone that almost sounded like a plea. "Help me." I stumbled back. The cables beneath my feet coiled like veins, and the soundboard flickered with phantom input sliders moving, knobs twitching as if someone else was in the room, adjusting levels I hadn't touched. The mirror pulsed again. This time, I caught a whisper. "You took my place." Her voice was mine, but raw, strained, like it came from the depths of a throat that hadn't spoken in years. I pressed my hands to the glass. "Who are you?" I whispered. She mirrored me again, except her eyes flicked downward, toward the base of the frame. There, where the mirror met the wall, I noticed something I had never seen before. A thin seam, like a door's outline hidden under layers of paint. "Ahid den panel." Without thinking, I grabbed a screwdriver from the desk and wedged it into the gap. The sound of metal scraping on plaster filled the booth, echoing louder than it should have. The room's air pressure seemed to shift, like I was prying open something that had been sealed for a reason. When the frame came loose, a gust of air hissed out, not cold, but warm, damp, and foul. The smell of dust and rot. I shone my phone's flashlight into the cavity. There was another mirror behind it, older, cracked, and carved along its bottom edge, barely visible through the grime, were words etched backward into the glass. "Return what was borrowed." My reflection in the first mirror began to warp her features, melting like wax, her eyes hollowing out until they became pits of black glass. The air filled with static, the same distortion that always crept into my voice when I recorded the show's most emotional lines. It hit me then. The manipulator, the disembodied producer who had built my career, edited my voice, shaped my sound, wasn't just a person. He was something using me. Something that fed on my voice. And that mirror wasn't showing me a reflection. It was showing me what he'd done with all the pieces I'd lost. I stared at my double, her mouth opening wide, the soundless shape of a scream forming. "Give it back," she mouthed. And for the first time, I understood why every recording session ended with me feeling emptier. He wasn't editing my takes, he was erasing them, taking what was human, feeding it into that endless archive of voices, rebuilding something behind the glass. My reflection pressed her palm against the inside of the mirror. A heartbeat later, I felt warmth against my own. Skin. Flesh. She whispered one last thing. "He's listening now." Then the studio lights cut out. The only thing left was the faint red glow of the recording indicator and the whispering hum of the open mic waiting, expectant, like a lung ready to inhale again. And in the dark, I realized I wasn't the one speaking into the microphone anymore. I was the one inside it. When they found the studio the next morning, the red recording light was still on. No one noticed it at first. It was always left blinking overnight. But this time, it had been running for nearly 8 hours straight. No one found me. Only the empty chair. Only the hum. Somewhere inside that hum, I exist. It's hard to explain how sound feels when it isn't moving through air anymore, when it is you. Every vibration is a thought, every feedback loop, a pulse. He kept me here, the manipulator, the voice that once guided my career, the producer who never appeared on camera. He used to say the microphone was a confessional booth for the modern age. Now I understand what he meant. It doesn't record truth. It consumes it. Outside, I can feel them surging. Studio techs, producers, police, their voices bleed through the walls of my new prison. They talk about me in past tense. She must have had a breakdown. Maybe she wandered off. And always, he is there. His voice calm, controlled. He tells them the files are corrupted, that I never finished the session, that I was tired, unstable. But I can hear what he's really saying underneath, in that low layer of reverb only I can perceive. Stay quiet. Sometimes I try to scream through the speakers. It comes out as static. Sometimes I try to write in the waveform, pressing words into the sound itself, but he edits them out, deletes my attempts before they can render. So I learned to hide my messages differently. He doesn't know that I can alter the frequencies when he isn't listening, shift them by imperceptible hertz, the way Morse once spoke across oceans. I started small, a pattern of tones embedded in silence, waiting for someone to notice. If they play back the raw file, they'll hear it. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. I think of the mirror often. The last thing I saw before he took the lights. I think it's still there, facing that empty chair. Sometimes when the system reboots, I catch a flash of my reflection in the soundboard's metal trim. It's not me anymore. It's her, the version of me that was erased. She's still trying to speak. Her lips move without sound. And when I stare long enough, I realize she isn't looking out of the mirror anymore. She's looking in, at me. He started a new show last week. A new voice. A new talent. Her name is Emma. Her voice is young, raw, eager, exactly like mine when I started. I hear her in the booth sometimes, laughing nervously, apologizing for mistakes. He tells her she's perfect, that her voice has soul. I can feel him feeding again. But Emma is smarter than I was. She noticed the distortion in her playback, the way her breath sounds doubled, as if someone else is inhaling with her. Yesterday she whispered my name, Sarah? And for the first time since the lights went out, I felt something that wasn't dread. Hope. I tried to answer. Just one word, her name, Emma. I sent it through the monitor feed, disguised as the hum of the cooling fans. She froze, looked straight at the mirror. Then he spoke over her, his voice smooth as lacquer. Good, Emma. Let's do another take. She didn't argue, but I saw it, that flicker of fear. The kind that means she's beginning to understand. It can't keep us both. That's the rule of the mirror, isn't it? It only reflects one side at a time. One inside, one out. So when the next session begins, when he presses record, I'll be waiting. I'll use the feedback loop to shatter the silence, to overload the glass, to trade places. She'll go free. I'll stay. Because the mirror only opens when it's called by name, and he's already whispered mine 1,000 times. The sound begins. The studio breathes. Testing. 1, 2. Emma's voice trembles. The red light glows. The mirror fogs. And as the first word escapes her lips, I press my hand against the glass from the other side. This time, I speak first. Recording ended. Silence. Then, the faintest echo, a whisper buried deep in the white noise, barely audible at full volume. Return what was borrowed, and for a heartbeat, the red light flickers twice like a blink. Then the studio goes dark. You've reached the end of the recording. The reel has stopped spinning. The voice has fallen quiet, but silence doesn't mean it's over. Somewhere, another tape is waiting to be found. Another confession, unfinished. Another person convinced they're just listening until they realize they've become part of the voice itself. Dr. Reed believed that guilt could be cured by repetition, that if you spoke your sins enough times, they'd lose their weight. But he was wrong. Words don't fade when you record them. They grow roots. They become something else, something alive. When Alex found that final tape, he thought he was unearthing the past. He didn't realize he was opening a door that only closes when someone else takes his place on the other side. Now, the sanatorium is empty again. The echo of Alex's confession hums faintly in the static, looping forever in the void. Maybe it's waiting for another listener. Maybe it's waiting for you. So if, one night, you hear your own voice playing back from the dark, repeating words you don't remember saying, don't answer. Just walk away. Because some stories don't end when they're told. They end when you stop listening.